You know what old Jack Burton always says at a time like this?
What are you playing at the moment?
Oh god, I've got some corkers. I've just finished Resident Evil 8,
Okay.
which I was astounded by. I'll be honest. I'm absolutely gobsmacked by that game. It's very rare that you come across a mainstream video game company at the moment, certainly a big AAA company like Capcom, that are willing to experiment so wildly with one of their core franchises.
Okay.
It's
And they've really...
bonkers. It's so unlike anything else in the Resident Evil stable. It could have fallen flat on its face.
Right.
It really could. It could have alienated the fan base very easily because it's completely different.
But didn't they kind of... I mean, I've not followed the franchise, so I don't... I seem to remember that they actually had problems earlier in the... I want to say 6, but I might be wrong about that. Where actually,
Yeah, the franchise really went downhill after Resi 4. Resi 4 was pretty good, but you could see the beginnings of it turning into something else at that point. I quite liked Resi 4, but it did have these inklings of something going wrong. 5 and 6 are lamentable.
Right.
I mean, they're just flat out terrible games. They're misjudged, they're misconceived. For some bizarre reason, the then presiding CEO of Capcom decided, oh, those Call of Duty games are doing well. Let's try and make a Resident Evil game like Call of Duty. Not realizing that in doing so, they're alienating both the Resident Evil fan base and the Call of Duty fan base.
Oh, I mean, COD's got zombies already.
Right.
So if you're fan and you want to play the COD mechanics and you want monsters, you've got a built-in mode that's as I understand it, gets bigger every release.
So this is it. So the Call of Duty fans have got Call of Duty. They're not going to go for like a substandard Resident Evil flavored Call of Duty. Resident Evil fans want a horror game.
What bloody Resident Evil?
Yeah.
If they want COD, they'd buy it. Yeah.
Exactly that. And there was a point where I was certain the franchise was dead. I was certain it was going to go away. And then we got the really good remakes, like the remake of 1, 2, and 3, all of which are absolutely stunning.
Right. I think I remember that then when they came out, yeah.
Well, basically, they are examples of how you do horror remakes right. They take everything that's essential about the originals and amplify it to the nth degree. They upgrade everything, they expand upon it, and make games that are vastly superior to the originals. I mean, there's no arguing with it, really. They are technically vastly superior to the originals, and they're beautiful. I mean, they're really excellent sort of B-movie zombie horror games. There's very little like them. But with when 7 came out, they went in an entirely different direction for the franchise. Basically, they realized that after 6, nobody liked it anymore. Nobody wanted it anymore. It was almost dead in the water. So what they did was they leapt into Konami's shoes. You know how Konami have basically let the Silent Hill franchise just die.
Yeah.
They've just let it die on its arse, basically. Capcom basically saw the appetite that was out there for a Silent Hill style sort of psychological horror, and they went, we can do that.
Right.
And that's what they did. Resi 7 is a full-blown psychological horror game, and it's really good. It reinvents the franchise, makes it very different from everything that's gone before. And that experimentation served them really well. Because people loved 7, it was brilliant. It was a really excellent game. With 8, they've done it again. So rather than just remaking 7, they've gone, let's just go wild. Let's make a gothic fairy tale horror game in the Resident Evil universe. And when I first saw the trailers it has werewolves, it has vampires, it has this weird little Transylvanian village in the shadow of a castle. I was sort of like, ooh, have they gone too far with this? Is this going to work in the Resident Evil universe? You know, it's excellent. It's absolutely stunning. I'm shocked. You know.
It's so great when they take risks and it works, though, isn't it? Doesn't that kind of restore your faith a little bit and make you think, like,
well,
you know...
a AAA video game company, I mean, I'm sure you must be tangentially aware of just how awful the mainstream video game industry is at the moment and just how many scandals are coming out, and Capcom seems to be one that has weathered it.
I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, I mean, well, not necessarily obviously, but as you might expect, I've been aware of it very much from a labour relations point of view. Where a crunch is well, two things I've been aware of actually from the video games industry. One is just the notion of crunch and the kind of deep unhealthiness of any environment that forces you to work an 80-hour week for any number of weeks. That's just not a healthy working environment. It's not healthy for the people involved. I actually happen to believe at the end of the day you get worse product as a result as well. I think
absolutely.
Because burnout is where mistakes really start to happen. And you're begging for burnout at that point.
Oh my! I know. It's so entrenched in the industry as well. That's the sad thing. It's been like allowed as part of making video games for decades.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'm aware of, which is a more kind of on the surface of it neutral thing that I'm still very skeptical of, is the notion of scrums and sprints as management teams. And what I find hilarious about these, I mean, actually, I remember a bit of, I keep, what I do for a day job, I keep deliberately vague. But one of the things I did come across at one point in one of my day job past lives was a person who was delivering training about management styles. And they did talk about sprints and they talked about sprints and they talked about scrums. And they said, what we found really interesting about this approach is so far we've not found it to be successful anywhere outside of software design.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually. They act like this is the newfound way of managing teams, and actually outside of that very specialist world, it
just doesn't work. Yeah,
it's an approach.
It's such a weird thing, isn't it? It does seem like because video games are still technically a sort of new, like historically they're the new medium, aren't they, of narrative and creative expression. It seems like a lot of the standards and laws that apply in other arenas haven't evolved there. And in fact, the cultures that have evolved are really terribly toxic, unfortunately.
I wonder if it's anything to do with the fact that they start off as creative projects and passion projects. I mean, I think back to if you think back to the early days of take, for example, ID Software, right? Think about sitting around making Wolfenstein. They probably were pulling 8-hour weeks, right?
Yeah.
Because they were in love with what they were doing.
Yeah.
And when it's half a dozen guys in a smelly bedsit and they've got nothing else to do all day and that's what they're doing. I mean, if that's how you want to spend your time, they weren't getting paid, right? They got paid back end once it came out and was a success, but they were doing it for the passion, they were doing it for the love. And a lot of creative industries are like that.
Absolutely.
I mean, the industry's very like that. Writing's very like that, I think. And I wonder if that's part of the problem with the culture. Yeah,
so it's sort of like these companies that started as basically little indie ventures, which at the beginning of video games they all were. All of them were.
Yeah.
Even the ones that became like the massive mega corporations now, like Capcom, like Konami, like EA, for example. I remember the early days of EA. I remember when EA was literally two guys in a bedroom,
Right, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, and I think Blizzard as well. But I think you're right. I think one of the things that happens if you grow in that way from something very small is, well, I think one of the dangers is that whatever culture is set with that first half a dozen people, that kind of permeates the culture of the entire organization, no matter how big it gets. Now, those first 6 people, they're probably quite homogenous.
Yeah.
Because they'll normally, I mean, if you think about it, if it's half a dozen people in a software team, chances are what they met in university.
Yeah.
In the same area. Again, I made the joke, but some of them probably started living in the same house even, right?
Absolutely true. No, it's absolutely true. When you look at certainly in the UK, when you look at the history of the bedroom coder, which was massive in the late 1970s, early 1980s, where a lot of these big companies were born. That was exactly it. It was these guys, and it was largely a male-dominated field at that point, who met at university, or even some of them, luckily, they were on their own. They were actually coding stuff on their own in their rooms, they got lucky somewhere along the way. Someone invested in them, someone employed them. And when they did develop their own software houses, it was like a group of 12 friends, maybe.
Right. And the thing is, because those groups are going to be homogenous groups, they're going to be made up of people largely from the same background, largely, I mean, let's be real, largely white men.
Yeah.
And there's certain, that doesn't guarantee certain cultural behaviours are going to manifest, but it makes it far more likely.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And the trouble is, it grows and grows and grows from that kernel, but it never really evolves.
Yeah.
If you're not careful. And I think that a lot of what was, and by the way, none of what I'm saying here should be misinterpreted as an attempt to excuse what's happening. What's happening is completely, and I'm really glad it's coming to light.
Yeah, I'm very happy. I mean, some of it was, it was worse than everyone has inklings that this stuff is happening in these companies, but the Blizzard stuff was way worse than I ever thought it could ever possibly be.
That was horrific. And it was, I mean, it's funny, it's not connected, but it reminds me of a similar thing because of the cultures and the backgrounds. But there was a similar scandal that broke with the Brewdog, the Scottish brewing company,
Right.
who have got, they've got, I think, Punk IPAs, their big seller, which is they get out in the supermarket, you'll see it. And it's reasonably tasty, very overpriced beer. I mean, it's fine. It's a nice product, but it's expensive for what it is, kind of thing. And a lot of the actual micro/craft breweries that are tiny kind of resent them because they've become this big kind of market. But it turns out, guess what? There's a really weird kind of unpleasant macho culture.
What a surprise, eh?
Brewdog. Who would have thunk it?
Who would have thought that?
Who would have thought that a kind of quote unquote punk ethos, when it becomes a mega corporation, actually has some kind of really unpleasant macho undertones?
Yeah.
Oh well, that's a shocker.
Yeah, massive shocker.
And it is. I think though it's interesting. It's that kind of. I think there's something about that. That kind of image of the scrappy, independent, that kind of scruffy, can-do thing. But it translates in a corporate environment into work yourself to death.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really weird.
It is strange, isn't it? And it's hard to tell, I imagine, where that tipping point happens. Because I love all this stuff. I love the history of like video game companies and whatnot. I watch documentaries about it and all sorts. But you can see it happening. Like one of the biggest and best well-known polymaths in all of video games from the UK was, of course, Peter Molyneux.
Right.
And what you described just there is his trajectory.
Right.
Like just perfectly. It's quite incredible, the history of Peter Molyneux. When he first started out, it literally was when it was Bullfrog. You remember when it was Bullfrog?
I remember Bullfrog, yeah. Well, we're both Amiga boys,
right? Right, so popular, SimCity Syndicate, I mean, for God's sake. Right?
Okay. Yeah,
and that literally was like 12 people, Bullfrog.
Right. Yeah, there you go.
But when it started to get bigger, when he started to get money behind him, when Bullfrog was taken over by EA and it became Lion's Mane, was it? Under Bullfrog? Lion's Head, that's it. Lion's Head under EA. That's when it really started to go wrong. That's when the culture that had propagated and that he still encouraged just stopped working. Because he couldn't seem to get out of this headspace. And I understand why. Because it's where all of the best work came from.
Right.
And I think at his heart, Peter Molyneux, I still have a soft spot for him. I really do. I think at his heart, I don't think he means to bullshit the player base. I really don't believe that. I think what happens is his imagination runs away with him.
You do feel like he's reaching for something. I mean, I'm just looking at I've just Wikipedia'd him while you were talking, and I've looked up his list of games. And I mean, there's the theme that jumps out to me. So you mentioned Populous. There's Theme, which I adored. PC in the 90s. That was a great game. Dungeon Keeper, man. I mean, my God. I playing Dungeon Keeper.
Yeah, I lost a lot of hours when I was like late teenager playing Dungeon Keeper.
Killer. And then Black and White.
Oh.
God Sim. But that one I really, really liked, because the thing about the Black and White, and this feels to me to be kind of quintessential Molyneux, is the mechanic that I liked in Black and White was whether the deity that you are playing becomes good or evil is entirely dependent on your actions within the game.
Yes.
There's no slider that you can hit that says, right, I want an evil god, so I get access to the evil powers. If you want to be an evil god, you've got to treat your people violently. You've got to slap them about. You've got to throw them in the sea. You've got to set fire to their crops or whatever. Like, and because I remember I was trying to go for a good build, and I ended up, the hand that portrays your deity, it changes depending on whether you're good or evil. And I saw it starting to corrupt. It started to change orange. Veins were growing, fingernails are getting longer. And I'm like, dude, I thought I was being good. Yeah. But I really liked that that mechanic of because what I liked about that was it felt like, I'm inherently attracted to the idea that you are what you do in the world morally. Intentions can go hang. It's what you actually do.
Mm-hmm.
And a game that tries to recreate that by almost like holding up a mirror to your play style, whatever it is, and saying, well, this is what it looks like. Of course, it's complicated by the fact that the game itself, how the game judges actions, is going to be arbitrary because it's a video game and it's not real life. But it's still fascinating stuff. And
It's ideas, isn't it? That's what Peter Molyneux is just full of, it seems. And I find, if he'd have stayed as a little indie company, if he'd stayed just as Bullfrog, maybe we'd still be talking about them now in glowing terms instead of the apocalyptic crash that they had. I mean, Peter Molyneux now can't operate in the video game industry. His name is trash, unfortunately.
No, right. I mean, the last thing I remember hearing about him was that what's inside the cube thing.
Yes, Goddess, yeah.
Yeah, which was one of those things where it was like, I came across it because I was listening at the time to a podcast called Idle Thumbs, which is I think they're still going, actually.
The Idle Thumbs are still quite big, yeah.
Superb video game podcast. And I learned about Spelunky and Binding of Isaac.
Right, so the big ones, yeah.
Through that podcast, and I was listening to. I mean, we're going back 10 years now, maybe, when I was listening to that regularly. But I remember them talking about what's inside the cube, and it was that thing of like, and the whole conversation, it always came back to, but it's Molyneux. Like, it could be
right.
Like, it could be great, but there's a high chance. There's like a non-trivial chance it's going to be complete
grain, like not a grain of salt. You want one of those big cartons of salt, don't you?
A couple of truckloads, just on standby.
Even at that point, if Goddess had been what he said it was going to be, if it had worked, he could have repaired his reputation.
Yeah, if he'd landed it right. But I mean, that's clearly an example increasingly. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because obviously the technology has improved exponentially since he started. I mean, unrecognizable, I think.
Yeah, totally.
If you were to put 1990 Molyneux in front of a 2020 laptop, he'd probably pass out. I mean, put him in front of a smartphone, never mind a laptop. And yet, it seems to me that his reach is massively exceeding his grasp. Increasingly, that's the story of his career as well, right?
It seems to be the way with like the older video game companies. There are not many of them that survive the transition from like 16-bit to 32-bit. So like from the microcomputer stage, like the Amiga and whatnot, up to the PlayStation and that kind of thing. Many of them tried and failed miserably.
That is the break point, isn't it? And it's quite incredible. And I do wonder why that is. I mean, it would be interesting to have some kind of some sort of psychological study that kind of to have a dig into. Because I think about the one franchise I can think of that really did make the crossover successfully from the Amiga for the PlayStation era, although it was PlayStation 2 as a debut, was Rockstar with GTA.
Of course,
very few. But even that, what's interesting about that is GTA existed, GTA and GTA 2, and what GTA 3 was the same game but 3D.
But 3D, yeah.
It was the same game. It was the same mechanic, and there was even a setting. I don't think I've got it anymore, but in GTA 3, you had a setting where you could set it so that it would do the top-down view.
So you just go back to playing like the original GTA, yeah.
Play it like I don't think it worked very well because I don't think it handled as well for various reasons, because it was designed, car handling was designed to work in 3D, so you'd have your route mapping and stuff like that if you tried to play it that way. But it was still but what was interesting was it was actually the same game, and it took advantage of all of the things you take advantage of with the new processing power to make it bigger and more complex, and save points, which was the real thing. Effectively unplayable, even though I adored that top-down game. I played the hell out of Amiga, but you needed to put 2 or 3 hours aside if you were going to try and make a serious run at it.
Yeah.
Oh, and you needed to learn the maps. Actually have a map of the city. It was that game was absolutely insane. And you had to score you had a score multiplier, and every time you completed a mission, the score multiplier went up, and every time you died, you lost your entire score multiplier. So you basically had to one shot because you had to score 100 million points to unlock the next level.
That's bloody brutal.
It was just absolute. I don't know if anyone ever made it to the third city on that game. I made it to City 2 a couple of times, but again, it was right. I'm putting aside an afternoon.
But that is fascinating though. So I wonder what qualities it is about the companies that did make the transition and that did it well. What qualities did they have? So there's companies like, do you remember Psygnosis?
Yeah, absolutely.
They made the transition pretty well.
Yeah.
I mean, they released some absolute corkers in the 32-bit era, and it was largely just corporate calisthenics that destroyed them.
Well, right, okay.
They got eaten up by EA and dissolved, as vast numbers of those companies did. But they did some pretty good work in the 32-bit era. Gremlin were an interesting one.
Right.
You remember Gremlin? They did a lot of Amiga games, a hell of a lot of Amiga games. Their last game I absolutely loved. Do you remember like the FMV games?
Yeah.
Like full motion video games where
Seventh Guest.
Yeah, exactly that. Seventh Guest, Realms of the Haunting, that kind of thing, where everyone was like the way the popular media was marketing them. It's like, oh, this is the new way games are going to be from now on. These interactive videos is how video games are going to be. A lot of companies bought into that, unfortunately, and almost to a one, the companies that did buy into it dissolved.
Oh.
Almost to a one, because they were massively expensive to make, way more expensive than normal video games were at the time. They were largely terrible.
Yeah, they weren't fun to play generally. That was the problem.
Well, they were just boring because a lot of them, there wasn't even a game involved.
Yeah.
You just had like the clips playing, and then you'd make a decision, like you could press right or something. They were basically like QuickTime events.
Well, yeah, it was like, I mean, the arcade cabinet I remember was Dragon's Lair, right? Which admittedly,
yes,
that was cell animation rather than FMV, but it was the same principle, wasn't it?
Yeah, Don Bluth. Yeah, I mean that at least was fun because that had like the hardness going for it,
It was impossible. But the other one I remember, like a similar thing that used the FMV effect in the arcade, was that they did a couple of cowboy shooter games.
That's right, like Mad Dog McCree.
There you go, yeah.
That kind of thing.
Because the way they worked was like it was literally the film paused for, what was it, like a half a second or a quarter second. And that was it. If you pull the trigger outside of that pause, even if you were aiming at the right person and you pulled the trigger, if it was outside of the pause window, you didn't hit.
You were done.
You had to time it absolutely perfectly. And it was, they would. I mean, it was amazing watching someone that had their eye in. I loved going to the arcade and watching someone that had actually played it a few times.
And was good at it.
Timing. Because it looked fantastic, but then you put your quid and you just die straight away. You'd be like, well, that was 30 seconds of my life. I'm not getting back. I'm not getting the quid back either. So
right, but I mean, like there was this period when the FMV games were huge. Like massive companies were investing in them, and Gremlin did one. They did this epic on the PC called Realms of the Haunting, and Realms of the Haunting is actually a good game.
All right.
It's actually a really decent game. The way they got around it was there are FMV sequences which tell the story and which are sort of role-playing elements. So you've got things like conversation trees. You can say like the right or the wrong thing and that kind of thing. And then in between that, you've got like this Doom-style horror first-person game that has puzzles and things in it. It's not bad at all. It's massive. It's sprawling. It comes on 4 discs.
Right.
It's huge, but it buried the company.
Oof.
It buried them. It was one of the biggest games in terms of budget. It was one of the biggest games of the era, and they thought because it was this big revolutionary horror game, it was really grown up. It has this like Dennis Wheatley occultism going on, They thought it was going to sell gangbusters, and it just didn't.
Yeah. Well, the FMV thing is interesting as well, isn't it? Because it does feel in a way it's like one of those kind of, in retrospect, it's almost like a dead end technology, isn't it?
Oh, so total. I mean, like, what's really fun, even in the good ones. This is true in Realms of the Haunting as well, and in like good. Like, have you ever heard of Phantasmagoria?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Another horror game that's all FMV. Not bad. It's a point and click adventure. It's actually not terrible, the original Phantasmagoria. But the big problem is you've got like actors. This is all new for them. Like the notion of green screen and all of this, we're going to put it in later, was new technology at that point. So actors didn't really know what they were doing at that point. And video games often didn't have the budgets to get in decent directors either.
Yeah.
So the actors are often not responding very well to what's going on around them because they can't see it.
Right. Because the interesting thing I remember with FMV was where it did end up kind of finding its niche was obviously in cutscenes. I remember a lot of FMV use in Command & Conquer, which was a series hell out of. And Command & Conquer 2 Red Alert, and the third one, I think it was Tiberian Sun, maybe.
Yeah.
That had because I had the guy from Aliens. That had Corporal Hicks from
It did.
Aliens.
It did.
James Earl Jones and I think am I dreaming, or did Tim Curry play like a?
You're absolutely correct.
Stasi officer or
Yes.
something. One of the God, that was hilarious.
Absolutely correct. I mean, there were some that did it well. There were some that employed it well. The Wing Commander series on PC.
I never played. I was aware of them. Yeah.
Pretty good. I mean, they're good because the stories are good. Primarily, the sort of flight sim kind of space dogfighting thing, I'm not that fussed about, to be perfectly honest. But the fun bits were when you were on the ships and you were playing this character who was interacting with Mark Hamill and Malcolm McDowell and the like. This immense cast. Really, quite fun.
I guess for the actors as well. I mean, I think about that. It's the same thing when you look at you look at an animated movie and you see it's got this cast of this insane cast of all A-listers, all triple A-listers. You think, how did they afford that? And then you realise it's because they each had to spend 2 days in the studio recording their lines. It's not very labour intensive. And
absolutely.
It must have been fairly similar, actually. They must have been able to shoot it all incredibly quickly because, as you say, it's all in front of a green screen.
Right.
So you got the costumes, you got the lines of dialogue, just shoot the lot. So you can get big names because it's going to be relatively inexpensive to produce, right?
And a lot of them were interested as well, artistically. I mean, I remember watching interviews back in the day with people like Malcolm McDowell and Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill is the main character in the Wing Commander series. Not typecast at all.
Well, yeah. I mean, I remember James Earl Jones in an interview about Command and Conquer saying, I've been an iconic figure for. This is my third generation of kids. I'll be an iconic figure for, because I had Darth Vader, and now I'm going to be in Command and Conquer, and I know this is, for the youth of today, this is a kind of iconic series, and I'm going to be again, and it's, that's really cool.
I mean, now, of course, these days, it's not uncommon at all to find A-listers in video games. They're all over the place.
Well, they get their own avatars in Fortnite. Ariana Grande just got her own.
Right.
You can run around in Fortnite as Ariana Grande. I don't know. Ariana Grande with a submachine gun. What world we live in? I don't know.
It's a very peculiar thing to think, isn't it?
Feels really strange. I can't put my finger on it, but that feels really strange to me.
That's verging on the surreal, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah.
But no, I mean, I finished Resi 8 recently, and I just fell in love with it. I think it's the most ambitious narratively. So Resi games, you don't really think of them in narrative terms, do you? I mean, they've had decent B-movie narratives up till this point.
I haven't played them in a million years, but I think of them primarily as resource management games.
Yeah, pretty much. Where you've got to
4 bullets and 6 zombies, and I don't know what to do.
What do I put back in the box? What do I carry around with me? Do I need this crank in the next section? Not sure. But in narrative terms, that's always been Silent Hill's bag, hasn't it?
Right, yeah.
The Silent Hill are the clever narrative horror games. Well, Resi 8 kind of treads on its toes a little bit. It's got themes. It's got all of these wonderful, weird themes going on about the tensions between parents and children. And it's wonderful. It has the best antagonist of any Resi game ever.
Is this the giant vampire lady
Oh no, that's Lady Dimitrescu. She is, despite the fact that they've used her to market the game, she's only in the first section.
Is the internet, and I don't know, maybe it's just my Twitter feed, and maybe that says something about the people I follow on Twitter, but they went bonkers.
That's the thing. That's the thing. Capcom did not intend the Lady Dimitrescu to be this big marketing figure for the game, right. But she happened to appear in the first trailer.
Right.
And that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. The internet went bonkers over this 9-foot-tall vampire woman.
Yeah, I found it really interesting because there was a lot of what I found really interesting is that there was an absolute ton of there was a confluence of things that people were getting out of it. There was obviously there was a thing about goth women, vampire women. Yep. Fine, that's a pre-existing. A lot of stuff about body positivity around. Yeah. Which is really, I found fascinating. A lot of people just glomming onto, I mean, I don't really know the details of it, but, glomming onto certain aspects of how she looked and being it is so great to see this kind of body represented, even if it is at 9 foot tall or whatever.
Well, yeah, because she is not like a super skinny supermodel archetype. I mean, she's beautiful. She's absolutely beautiful, but she's like almost like she's got like a 1920s almost like flapperish quality about her.
But I just think as well, there's something about, I think maybe I'm outing myself and I should stop talking. I think there is something about giant women that is very appealing.
She's very giant.
Yeah, and I think I'm just going to say that and leave it there. But
in fact, it's almost played as a joke in the game. One of the things that the game does do, like her home, the Castle Dimitrescu, it's made for normally proportioned people.
Right.
So
just constantly
every time she goes through a door, she's got to duck, she's got to bend double, and it's played as a bit of a joke. Every time you see her, the camera does watch as she has to like bend double to get underneath. It is quite funny, but she's a great character as well. That's the thing. She's not just like a mega monster. All of them are. All of the characters in this game are really, really interesting. And she's wonderful. Dimitrescu she's only in she's like the first big antagonist of the game. She's absolutely wonderful. And she does, she has that classic Resi thing of when you actually fight her, she becomes something really monstrous and brilliant, I loved her. But the big villain is Miranda.
Oh, okay.
Miranda is sort of like the matriarch of these. There are 4 of them. There's the Lady Dimitrescu, and then there's 3 others, and they're basically like the rulers of this little. I want to say like Eastern European, because that's as specific as it gets.
Right.
It's basically Romania, Transylvania, Moldavia, kind of, but not really.
Sure.
It's as non-specific as it can be. They're the rulers of this little village, and Miranda is like the matriarch who rules over them. And their dynamic is that of a family.
Oh, okay.
So Miranda is the mother, and they're all the squabbling children that are vying for her patronage and attention.
I see. Yeah.
Meanwhile, you play Ethan Winters, who is trying to find his own newborn daughter, Rose, who has been taken by these characters for reasons unknown. So there's immediate tension between him and Miranda, one parent to another.
Sure.
It's cool stuff. I mean, you just don't find that in Resident Evil games. They're not generally, and up till this point, they haven't really been made like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess what the team, I mean, the calculated risk they took was the idea that nature abhors a vacuum, and if Silent Hill are going to absent the field for this kind of storytelling, that we know there's the appetite because we've seen how many copies of Silent Hill got sold.
Exactly. We'll go for it.
By the way, the current thing isn't working, so
yeah,
let's strike out in a new direction.
It was brave. You know? It was brave and unexpected, and it's paid off dividends. I mean, another thing it does, I mean, I was very wary, because of course it's foregone the classic zombies and whatnot, and it's the main monster you encounter are werewolves now. They're lichens. And werewolves, I always find, are a very difficult sell.
Right.
In any medium. I think they're very difficult to get right, and I think they're even more difficult to make genuinely threatening, scary, interesting. The lichens in this game are wonderful.
Oh, that's good to hear.
They're really scary. The way they're framed is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, before you even encounter them, you see the effects of them. So you wander through this village that's in the shadow of Castle Dimitrescu, and you find these empty homes, which it's like the Mary Celeste. There are pots on the boil, there are meals that have been left out, and you'll see carnage in one room. You'll see like scratches on the walls and furniture that's been ripped up, and you'll see blood spattered everywhere. The absolute utter carnage that these things can wreak, and you'll just hear them in the distance. You'll hear them rustling, you'll hear them growling. It's brilliant framing.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, because I'm with you. I've got an enormous soft spot for werewolves as a creature. They are often, I think, very badly served.
Yep.
By especially movies. I think it think it's very, very, very hard to make a good werewolf movie. I don't think there are very many good werewolf movies.
I can sort of, the ones I actually like, I can sort of count on the fingers of one hand, if I'm honest.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a tough old thing to pull off. And even werewolves, not in werewolf movies, but in popular culture. I think about the werewolf in what is it, Prisoner of Azkaban. I mean, it's awful.
Yeah,
it's a terrible effect. I mean, it just doesn't work. And they did a lot better. Funnily enough, they did a lot better the year after in Doctor Who in Tooth and Claw.
Yes, which I actually rather liked as a werewolf. Yeah, I've got to say.
Creature. Which is interesting that they managed to pull it off on the BBC budget and they couldn't get it done on the Harry Potter budget.
Yeah, that is fascinating, isn't it?
But it's pretty unusual as well. And obviously, I mean the transformation scenes in American Werewolf are kind of legendary for a good. I mean,
it's almost like
it's kind of unsurpassed,
right?
Really.
And it's almost like you almost hesitate to say it, don't you? Because it's one of those things that you just can't get away from.
Well, sometimes someone sets the bar, and sometimes it never gets beaten, and that is still the bar to beat. And
it's such a cool transformation. That's the thing. Yeah. I mean, I love the notion. I mean, that really bothers me in werewolf media when the transformation is too easy.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, this transformation is rearranging like your bodily structure, your organs, everything.
Yeah.
It's going to hurt, isn't it?
I think the other thing is the werewolves themselves are just so hard. I mean, I think creating a werewolf that was actually menacing pre-CG would have been incredibly difficult, and post-CG they're very challenging because of the fur, which is just a hard to render inherently in CG. I mean, it's all right if you're trying to do something like Monsters Inc. and you're creating a creature like Sully who's part of the world then you can do it. And I mean, Sully looks great. Don't get me wrong. I think it's one kind of, but it wouldn't work. Sully wouldn't work in a live action movie.
No, it would look like a CG effect, wouldn't it?
Exactly. And I think werewolves are almost kind of uniquely difficult to render in a kind of effective way. Because the trouble with physical effects is you always end up with a guy in a suit. And my version of werewolves, part of the problem is they get bigger, right? That they're sort of 7, 8, 9 foot tall or whatever. And they never move right in movies either. Never move with that kind of fluidity that you kind of instinctively feel.
Like the grace of a wolf. It's very tricky to capture, isn't it?
I mean, actually, the only medium that I think really pulled off werewolves properly was the role-playing game, the Werewolf the Apocalypse. I think the from the 90s, because I would say that because I played a hell of a lot of it. Games mastered a lot of it in particular. But I genuinely think that the mythos they created for that was absolutely perfect. The idea that werewolves were Mother Earth's immune system, and that humans represented a disease, like a crazed spirit, the spirit of destruction, the worm that had gone mad and was, basically it was the idea that you had the wild, which was pure creativity, you had the weaver who created order out of chaos, and you had the worm whose job was to destroy, to make space for things, and they were supposed to be in balance. But then the Weaver goes mad. I mean, the mythos, and it just fits with the kind of the 20th century and the Industrial Revolution, right? The Weaver goes mad. The worm gets caught up in the web and is in turn driven mad. And then the worm just tries to destroy everything.
Right.
And the whole point is you as werewolves are Mother Earth's immune system and the last line of defense. And
it's like a byproduct of a malfunctioning system.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also, what's nice about it is the game was called Werewolf the Apocalypse, and the kind of underlying thrust to the game, which appealed to 19-year-old me in ways you can probably immediately imagine, was you can't win. Like the apocalypse is coming. Like it's a prophecy, but it was also, I mean, the thing about the werewolves in that game was also they were partly spiritual creatures. They could travel into the spirit realm. They could see, which kind of cobbled stuff together from Celtic and Native American traditions to kind of
right. So they had almost like a shamanistic thing going on.
Completely. No, completely. It was called, you could travel to the Umbra, which was the spirit world version of our world, and you could interact with things in the Umbra, and that would have an effect in the physical world, and vice versa. Your weapons were made out of spirits that were bound to physical objects. You can make magical weapons, all this kind of stuff. I mean,
that. I really like that, because there is a tendency in werewolf mythoses to ignore metaphysics, isn't there? Rather than making them more mythic or metaphysical, they go the other way, and there's a tendency for them to be a disease or something like that.
Yeah, and animalistic as well. And then that was in the game too, but what I liked about the game was it kind of had all of it. It kind of threw them, because it had, the werewolves were split up into different tribes, and some of the tribes were warring with each other, and they all had different philosophies. You had you had like the Get of Fenris, who were like traced themselves back to the Norse tradition.
I was going to say Nordic, yeah.
Right, and they very much believed in a like very kind of, I mean, the human version of them believed in a very kind of rugged individualism, like you buy your own land, you build your own house, and you do that. And you know, and at the extreme edges, some of them would edge into supremacy in kind of unpleasant ways. They were kind of tricky. You had the Red Talons, who were pure lupus. They wouldn't take a werewolf that started as human. They would only. They were pure, and they were dying out. They were nearly gone. And then you had the Glasswalkers, who lived in the cities.
Oh, okay.
Like, oh, the city is an evolution of the wild, and you can make it work. And they were often entrepreneurs or street punks, right? It could go either way.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was really, really cool.
It sounds like the equivalent of Vampire the Masquerade, you know, kind of like the equivalent mythology for werewolves.
It was the sequel game, yeah.
Right. So there you go, yeah.
Same world of Darkness, yeah. And like the basic split was the werewolves lived in the wild and the vampires lived in the city, and there were just a couple of tribes that overlapped, and I think there was one werewolf tribe that had a kind of wolfen aspect to them that could actually turn into wolves. And then there's this whole thing about, I think they call it gangrel or something.
The gangrel, yeah.
That's right. And they had this whole thing about like, gangrel may inadvertently find itself in touch with a werewolf set and will do everything it can to stay hidden, because if the werewolves discovered the vampires, they will just kill you out of hand.
Yes, because the vampires definitely had a kind of racial supremacy thing going on in that game system.
Yeah, and also the werewolf most of the werewolves believed that the vampires were inherently of the worm. They were inherently of the destroyer.
Kind of true, actually. when you look into their back mythology, yeah, it's kind of true.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously, what I liked about it was the game left just enough possibility that exactly the right werewolf from exactly the right background and exactly the right vampire,
could get along. They could have
super off the books, right?
Yeah.
They could hang out a little bit. They could,
Yeah.
And I love that. Was nice. You felt there was just the touching edges of the world.
There are not many of the vampire covens that would allow for that. There aren't many, but they do exist.
Yeah, that's the flip side of it, isn't it? Right, and and there's this almost kind of hint that like somewhere around the back, like maybe the gangrels and the Get of Fenris or the gangrels, something like the Red Talons have this kind of unofficial live and let live policy.
Well, it kind of makes sense because like the gangrels are hated by the other vampires as well, so they're the outcast vampires. So it would make sense for them to find solace with other creatures that the vampires hate as well.
Yeah, there you go, exactly. So it kind of works out. But yeah, and but I loved that because that game. I mean, I played the hell out of that for a long time, but I really enjoyed how that, because the whole like the mechanics of that system where you had your three main the stats that you used the most, or that were the ones that you spent to do things, were willpower, gnosis, which was like your spiritual knowledge, and rage. Rage was one of your powers, but the rage was the perfect double-edged sword. The more of it you had, the more things you could do when you were a werewolf, the more damage you could soak up, the more impressive combat feats you could do. But also, the higher your rage, the higher your difficulty of containing the beast. The higher
right.
Flipping out when you didn't want to.
Got you.
And it was just great. And that was just a brilliant mechanic. Because
I mean, like, in tabletop terms, that'd be fun as well. I mean, I've played Vampire the Masquerade on the tabletop, but I haven't played, like, the werewolf equivalent.
Because I think Vampire used willpower as well, but Vampire...
It did, yeah.
Humanity, didn't it?
That's right.
And I think it was a similar mechanic with Humanity and Rage. I think it had a similar... Because Humanity had a similar kind of trade-offs at both ends, right?
That's right, yeah. So the less humanity you had, the more vampire you were, effectively. So you actually became kind of more powerful.
But wasn't
technically
danger, like you drop off the edge of the humanity scale and it gets...
That's right.
Right? Yeah.
You become a monster.
Right.
Effectively, if you lose all of your humanity, you become an absolute horror.
Right, you just become effectively an NPC, right? You're kind of out.
Yeah.
Right, and that's So the rage mechanic worked very similarly in Werewolf, and it was brilliant. It was so much, and also like, but the thing about the rage was great was that, and you needed it. You absolutely needed it as a character. There were times when it would. It would save your life, or it would enable you to do something really big. But I again, as a 19-year-old, you can imagine why that appealed to me on a fair.
Absolutely. I mean, that is. I'm surprised I never picked that up myself, to be honest, because it sounds like right so up my 19 to like 25-year-old alley, to be honest.
It was great fun. It was one of those games you needed to find the right group of players for, because it was really kind of, if you didn't have enough people of a like mind, I think it could have gotten kind of either very silly or very unpleasant very quickly. It was one of those because of the subject matter and because it was.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean that's the problem you have with a lot of the horror RPGs.
Yeah.
Like the tabletop ones. The balance is really difficult to hit. You've got to know who you're playing with effectively, especially if you're the DM.
Yeah, and I think for me, fundamentally, what you need is players, whether you're one of them or whether you're GMing. I think fundamentally what you need for those games, especially for the World of Darkness games, is people who buy into the premise of the central conflicts, right? That conflict between humanity and whatever the other thing is. Wraith had a similar mechanic whereby if you got entirely separated from your emotional ties to the physical world, then you became an NPC. So but the more ties you had to the physical world, the tougher your life was as a Wraith, because you had interacting in Wraith society. And I loved that. I think players that bought into that tension, that's what you need, is players who...
That's where the role playing is, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where the fun lies. And then within that, of course, you've got the realm of possibilities. I mean, again, what I loved about Werewolf was just the sheer range. I think there were 12 tribes. So you're and each of the tribes, you could be a werewolf that started as a wolf, a werewolf that started as a human, or metis, which means you were born of two werewolves, and you're actually outcast. They're called mules.
Oh, okay.
And they can't reproduce themselves, and they're considered to be kind of, and like most werewolves kind of consider them to be outcasts if you're born, because you were born of a werewolf, and that's not permitted.
That's basically just taboo.
Exactly. So you already kind of got 2 marks against you before you've even.
Interesting. Very interesting. I mean, funnily enough, a lot of the science fiction, like Cyberpunk, uses a similar mechanic. So, in a lot of the science fiction games, you can upgrade yourself. It's like transhumanist,
Right.
And you can spend points to upgrade cybernetic arms and eyes, and you can upgrade your brain and all sorts of things. But the more you apply, the less human you become.
Yeah, and I think, and the other game that immediately springs to mind that uses a similar-ish mechanic is the Call of Cthulhu, the Sanity, right? Where,
of course,
the more arcane knowledge you gain of the things you're trying to fight, the more tenuous your grip on reality becomes.
But what I like with the Call of Cthulhu RPGs is you can't help it. No. Your characters are going to get delivered into the abyss of insanity by the end.
The inevitability of it is part of the fun. I mean, again, that was what I liked about Werewolf, was the feeling of like the apocalypse. Like, it's just going to keep getting worse. It's just going to keep getting tougher. The challenges are going to keep getting tougher. You're always feeling like you're hanging on by the fingernails and slowly sliding down. It's just great fun. It's just great fun to play that. And
there is something. I mean, there is some fun to be had with that kind of story, isn't it? Especially in a role-playing setting. Like, I mean, the equivalence. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love D&D to bits. I think it's great fun, but it does tend to be a bit more upbeat, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. D&D's kind of I always think of D&D as playing it's the hero's journey arc. It's inherent to the form, partly because it's cribbing from Tolkien, right? In terms of
right.
But it's always that feeling with D&D, like you're expected ultimately to get to level 50 and then go off and fight the gods.
Yeah,
that's kind
of... and become a god. Yeah.
And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. That's great fun. I've played that game too, and I've enjoyed it. But I think there's something. Yeah, what I liked about World of Darkness was just that, and especially Werewolf, was just that feeling of just the relentless turning of the screws, and it made every victory feel all that sweeter, for knowing it was kind of every victory you were making was in the teeth of a greater defeat. Everything.
And they're just flat out harder as well. I mean, D&D is very liberal with things like its upgrade points and its magical treasures and all that kind of thing. Whereas if you play like your average game of Vampire the Masquerade, you're lucky to survive most sessions.
I think that's a really good point. Also, I think D&D's either like that or it's too hard. I mean, I have played a couple of I played Temple of Elemental Evil around a while ago, and a long while ago now. And I read through, what was it, Chamber of Horrors. I never actually played it, but like it's either, for me, D&D always falls between two stools. It's either, as you say, it's too liberal, or it's just too hard. And
it's too hard.
It's a puzzle box where you don't have enough information to know what the right answer is. You have to basically try and read the mind of the DM, and then And I never like that. What I love best about Werewolf, and I'm sure this applies to Vampire as well, as a GM, was the thing that I hit on quite early on in game design, in scenario design, was you don't and I got it from reading their scenarios, by the way, the ones they produced. I bought a couple of whatever they were called, scenario packs, which were really helpful because the key was you don't write a solution.
Yeah.
You just write the problem. And you let players figure out the solution. And it was so freeing once I realized that, because it was like, whatever, you've got to rescue a couple of werewolves who've been taken from been taken from this place, they've been taken somewhere else, you've got to rescue them. Okay, so now put yourself in the head of the bad guys.
That's it.
What are their resources? Okay, so what kind of cell are they going to design? What kind of compound are they going to design? How many troops can they afford? What are they going to look like? Are they going to be susceptible to werewolf attack? Are they going to have there was this whole mechanic where like ordinary humans would just go into a gibbering wreck if they saw a werewolf, right? So
of course,
are they going to be immune to that? How many of them are? All that kind of stuff. But beyond that, you don't write a solution. You just set the parameters. Are they going to be spiritual defenses? What are they going to look like? And then just let the players work it out.
Yeah. You don't let the players write their own story, yeah.
And they'll always surprise you, and they'll always do better than you expect. And you should always make it a bit harder. You should always be hard enough that when you're looking at maybe thinking, I really don't know if they're going to make it. That's about the right setting, because they'll always come up with something that you weren't expecting.
That's it. It's when they allow themselves to imagine their ways out of a scenario and it works. It fits. It is the best thing, isn't it? It is the very best thing. I remember I played with some friends of mine recently. They have never played in their lives a tabletop RPG, like never in their lives. Okay. And I wrote for them a scenario in D&D.
Right.
One of the characters he's a druid that hates nature. He's got he's got this thing where he hears the sound of nature in his head all the time. So he hears like the voices on the wind, he hears the voices of trees and of blades of grass and of bugs in the trees, and it drives him mad. He hates it. He's also a werewolf, and there was this moment where he actually turned in the midst of an encounter, and he went to kill one of the other characters who was a necromancer. And if he'd have barreled into this necromancer, he'd have killed him. Right. He'd have just ripped him apart, because the necromancer was only like level 1. He had nothing going for him. But this necromancer was also an alchemist. And as we'd been playing, I'd been like allowing him to go around gathering all these bits and pieces and cobbling them together into potions. And he had this flash of brilliance as the werewolf leapt at him, and he just said, I reach into my pack and I grab the nearest potion and I just chuck it.
Nice.
And he got a 20. He got a natural crit. So I was like, oh, this is fucking brilliant. This is amazing. Because you got the natural 20, basically, the impact causes the werewolf to skid away across the floor. He doesn't hit you. And the potion that you chose just happens to reverse his transformation,
Nice.
It was like the best thing.
You gotta love it when the dice reward ingenuity too. I always think it happens more often than it should. I think it's really.
I think so. The dice gods, when the dice gods are looking down upon you, it's wonderful.
Well, I always think about it. I always think about it in Pratchett terms. I kind of I remember when I read the first couple, like Color of Magic, like fantastic, and for a little while I kind of half believed in Fate and the Lady, because it was
yeah.
And I just loved the idea, like, well, if we're gonna have gods, let's have a pantheon, and let's have it be Pratchett's pantheon, because they're awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I do love the idea of, like, just, and the Lady. That's what I love about her. It's like sometimes she just turns up. You don't know. She's going to she ain't, and you can't make it happen, you can't unmake it happen.
There's something very liberating about that, isn't there? About the notion of something else being in control that you have no power over.
But what I particularly loved about it in the Pratchett mythology and it's great because it's so early in the run, and he obviously got involved in more earthly concerns later, but I love how in those couple of books he's really swinging for the fences philosophically. He does it again in Small Gods, which is probably my favourite.
Which is awesome.
Probably my favourite. It's just imagine.
Brother.
Yeah. No, it's just think about that. Forget Another Impossible Command. It's just so great. But the moment I love in Color of Magic is where it's like it's Fate who's winning the game, and Fate always wins because you can't beat Fate. And then the lady sits down, and everyone just draws in a breath.
Yeah,
because it's like, oh, I have no idea what happens now, and I love that. Just conceptually, that is fantastic. That is so great. And I love it. I mean, I think, if you think about it, that kind of is the essence of every role-playing game, right? The GM is Fate, the dice are the lady, and it's just like, That's the eternal contest, really.
I mean, it happens the other way as well, doesn't it? Where no matter what, they will keep flubbing the roll.
Oh my god, it could drive you nuts. I mean, I actually, funnily enough, I was thinking about this the other day as well. One of my all-time, probably my favourite D&D experience I ever had as a DM was off a dice roll. It was so hilarious. It was a random encounter. It had nothing to do with the scenario, though. They had a bit where they had to cross wilderness, and you had to take, you had to roll for every whatever it was, 2 hours of travel. You had to roll.
Yeah.
Rolled it might have been a 2 in 20 chance of a random encounter, something like that. And I got the play. I always make the players roll the dice, so that it's out in the open. Because I don't like. I mean, I'll use the screen, but I use it very, very carefully. Because I don't like that. I prefer to. Because I like the players to know that we're playing with live rounds, and also that it's an honest game. I don't like.
Yeah, so you're not sort of fudging too much.
I don't like to roll behind the screen too much, so I'd make the players roll the random encounter, not telling them what the roll meant, of course, because that
just get them to roll the dice. Yeah,
interesting, isn't it? And every time they roll a 1 or a 20, they're looking at me like sweating. What's just happened. Sometimes I make them do it, and there was nothing to roll for either. But that's, you got to keep them on the toes. But not very often, but just once in a while. But this one, they rolled the random encounter, and it was the wilderness. And I looked on the table, and I've got them to roll again, and they rolled a 20, and it was a juvenile green dragon.
Oh my god! What?
And I've never had a dragon before, because Dungeons and Dragons, the thing is, like, if you've not played it, you don't. But like, the dragons are tough. Even
dragons are like
you don't encounter dragons until like level 15, 20, because they're and these guys were all like level 10, and they'd worked their way up to level 10. We've been playing for months by this point, and I rolled the juvenile green dragon. I thought, I can't not do this. I've got to do this now. And it was,
God,
it was one of the best fights I've ever GM'd, and they got out, and I think 3 of them were on like. Had like less, were on like 5 hit points between them or something. One guy went down completely and had to make the critical, whatever, the recovery rolls and that. But they just threw everything they had at it. That was what
they would need to.
Yeah, so they were like, right, what's that magical item we've been saving for? Right, who's got the wand of magic missiles? Right, who's got this? Who's got the fireball? Right, go.
Yeah,
now. It was great. It was
wow. That must have been like when you explained it to them.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't, because they were all like, "Oh, was that like the climax of the entire scenario?" I was like, "No,
no,
that was supposed to happen. You just rolled the wrong 20 at the wrong time, and you got the fucking green dragon, guys." And so
that's brilliant. That is like the equivalent of just like going into the graveyard, like just plumbing the local crypts for treasures and whatnot, turning a corner. Oh, there's a lich.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, oh, come on, man.
It's like run away. Alright.
So great. But that was the great thing as well. They had nowhere to hide. They're out in the wilderness. They're out in the middle.
Fighting a dragon out in the wilderness, that's even worse. Because it's got space. It can fly.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was airborne. Yeah, no, it was so good. It was.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, the clever dragon doesn't land.
No.
It just circles and uses its breath weapon.
Yeah. No, it was so good. I think they found out. I can't remember how they did it now, but I think they found a way to bring it down, so they had to fight on the ground. But yeah, it was just.
Oh yeah, they've got to be creative, haven't they? Yeah, exactly. They've got to be creative. Like, with any luck, they've got a wizard or someone who's got like feather step or something like that, or can cast fly on them or something to that effect. Or you've got a really kick-ass archer, or something with a magic bow or something like that can ground the bastard. Yeah,
that's it. And I think the other thing is, as a DM in that situation, that is where you do cut them some slack, right?
Yes. So, if it's random as well. I mean, you've got to, don't you? You've got to.
Well, just let them give themselves a chance to surprise you, and they will every time. Like, a good group of players will surprise you every time. And that's when it really does feel like it's this kind of magic collaborative thing,
Oh, when they do something well. I mean, I had one player. It was like the second half of this scenario. They were in a city at this point, and it's like this massive cosmopolitan city where there are races you just wouldn't expect wandering around. It was a bit like Sigil, Right. And he was running away from city guards for reasons, and he ran into a beholder that was in the market.
Oops.
Like smack bang into it.
No.
And the beholder, you know what beholders are like with other races. They don't like them, don't like to interact with them, don't like to look at them, and certainly don't like to be touched by them.
No, indeed.
And this beholder was very, very offended. Like, very offended. But he managed to... He was like this character who was kind of quick-talking.
Right.
And he managed to flatter his way out of it. To the point whereby the beholder actually offered him work. You know?
Oh god, yeah. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? You get those situations. Right? I mean, I ran Castle Greyhawk.
Oh, so much fun.
Loved it because the dungeons in that are just insane.
They're bonkers. I mean, like in Castle Greyhawk, because Castle Greyhawk is linked to the real world,
Yeah.
to this world. So, honest to God, there are levels in Castle Greyhawk where you will open a door and it will be a dressing room for a movie set.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. No, it's
And the cast of Star Trek are in there.
My favourite thing on Greyhawk was just reading through the first level dungeon description, and I got to a bit where the description of the monsters was sideways jet-propelled piercers, and I found my home. This is my...
There's a level where there's Thor, like
right.
honest to God, Thor is there, and you can fight Thor.
Yeah. Well, there's a Spider-Man equivalent. I can't remember what he's called, but it's a creature that's a kind of, except he's literally part spider, part man.
What's the wizard who made Greyhawk? The one who travels between worlds and is like basically God. He's God. He's one of the godlike wizards of D&D. It's Mordenkainen, isn't it?
Oh, it could be. Yeah, it could be.
It's Mordenkainen, I'm fairly certain. So basically, I just love the notion that he takes characters from different worlds and different mythologies and shoots films with them.
Yeah, no, it's so great. It's
bonkers.
Yeah, it's so fun. But like, I just remember in that one there was a random creature. It was a cookie dough golem.
All right.
Called Poppin' Fresh, obviously.
Obviously. Yeah. Oh, for God's sake.
Like, he appeared in the game, and by the way, this is a clue. Don't ever do this. If you have an NPC, no matter how insignificant, here's a pro tip: don't give him a silly voice.
No.
Because I gave him I did one of those.
No.
Because I thought he was going to last 5 seconds, right? I thought they would just kill him. No. Poppin' Fresh joined the party.
Yeah.
They befriended him, and he was the cookie dough golem with the party for 6 months.
Yeah, so you were doing that voice for 6 months.
Voice for 6 months. I finally, I did. I have to confess. I can confess this now because none of them will listen to this. I actually did kill him off in the Temple of Elemental Evil on purpose. Stand playing him anymore. Let him walk into a trap and die.
Yeah, that's the end of that.
Because I was just like, I'm not doing this. I've had enough. And he tried to heal him. I'm like, he's made a cookie dough. You can't heal him.
I'm not allowing that.
It's not going to work. It's not. You can't bake him. It's not.
I was going to say, did any one of you take baking as a proficiency? No. Well, that's the end of it.
There were stats for if you baked him. That was the sick part. But
right. Okay.
Because he became a cookie golem at that point, obviously.
So like. More crumbly, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he had higher armor class, but in less hit points.
All right. Yeah, some of those older like D&D campaigns, the ones written by Gygax, were weird.
Yeah. No, that was absolutely insane. But it was
very difficult. He was a killer. I mean, I know he created D&D, but some of his scenarios are a bit much, you know.
No, he was an absolute monster. He was one of those like. Yeah, you see the green gem in the stone. Do you pick it up? It's like,
and it's like,
don't go anywhere.
No,
shut the door. Leave.
No. There's a boat moored. Do you take the boat? Do you sail down the river? No.
Don't do that. Ideally, don't leave home. Just stay on the farm, basically.
Right, yes, just stay on the damn farm. It doesn't matter what happens. I mean, even if a tornado comes along and rips the farmhouse up and deposits you in a fantasy world, just don't go outside.
Yeah, no, that's it. Absolutely. It's not worth it.
not in any of Gygax's campaigns, it's not.
Oh dear.
Bloody hell! I mean, the other one I've been playing, Disco Elysium.
Oh yep. I've heard nothing but good things. I'm gonna have
just started playing that on my channel because it's become available on the PS4.
So yes.
That is something else.
No, I'm actively resisting. I don't know how long I'll be able to hold out, but
I don't even know. It's one of those experiences where there's no analog.
Right, that's what I hear. Well, the thing I heard about it was basically it's a video game made by people who haven't made video games before, right? It's something weird like that. Like they're not.
Yep.
Yeah, and I love.
It's sincerely surreal.
Yeah.
Like sincerely. Like the first thing you have to do in the game is have an argument with your own subconscious about whether you want to start the game.
Oh God.
That's the first thing you do. And your subconscious is constantly telling you, you know what, it's nice here in Oblivion, isn't it? You don't have to do anything. There are no ex-wives or anything. Why don't you just stay here? And one of your options can be, yeah, this is great.
Right.
Why not? It's nice here.
And then what? Nothing happens. That's the end of the game.
Yeah, you just keep going. You just keep going in the conversation, and that's it. It just keeps going and going and going until you eventually say, I suppose I should wake up. Don't want to, but... And as you're wandering around the game, your character will get, like, these thought circles that appear around his head.
Right.
And you can either choose to follow those trains of thought or not.
Okay.
And the thoughts come from different parts of your subconscious. So one trail, all it wants is for you to smoke.
Right.
And it comes up all the way through the bloody game.
It's really funny.
And there are these long, elaborate conversations you have with yourself where this part of you is saying, oh, isn't it a glorious thing to smoke? Don't you look cool? Don't you know? It's amazing, honestly. And depending on what trains of thought you choose to focus on and follow determines how your character and the world comes out.
Oh, nice. So we are back to like the Molyneux stuff there almost.
Yeah.
Sounds like, except executed well by the sounds of things.
Oh, beautifully. It's like a surrealist play. Like a French surrealist play. It's so strange. I've never come across anything like it. There isn't anything like it, not in video games.
That's so cool, isn't it?
It's beautiful. I mean, it's compelling. It's one of those things that you just cannot leave it alone.
I'm just, it's incredible to me that we've somehow this ecosystem is created where there is this vibrant indie video game, which I would not have predicted,
No, I thought it was gone. I mean, like, there was that period in what we were talking about earlier in like the early 80s when there was the bedroom coders. And that was huge in this country. You actually had like a thriving indie market, and then it went away for decades.
Yeah.
When the sort of Japanese consoles took over the market.
Yeah.
It went away.
I think the thing was figuring out a way to pipeline indie games back off. I mean, there's two things, isn't there? The first we've talked about before is Steam, which, funnily enough, I think of Steam more and more. I think the analogy between Steam and Amazon self-publishing.
Yep.
I think it's exactly the right analog, where it's like it's basically meant anyone can produce a video game. Anyone that is at the time can produce a video game and put it up for sale, and the market will decide. And in the same way that anyone can write a book now and put it up and decide if they want to buy it, right? And that is an incredible. I mean, you can't argue with that as a tool for creative outlet. You can have issues with the way the company conducts its business, and I have profound issues with both Steam and with even more so with Amazon for various obvious reasons. But that aspect of it is undeniably powerful.
Yep.
Does release potential. It does create this incredible environment. But what I think is incredible, what I think is closed the loop with video games is now there's a pipeline for at least some of those titles, the more successful ones, to find their way back to the consoles, which was and that's really exciting because that's where it now, because that's still, I mean, the consoles are now unfortunately where most people are gaming.
It's where it's going, isn't it? But you know what? I mean, for all the problems I have with the big mega corporations, and of course there are many, I've got to give credit to the likes of Sony for opening up their markets to the indie scene.
Absolutely, yeah. Because they did.
Got to give them credit to that.
They were running a closed shop for a long time, and they've. I mean, look, let's not be naive about it. They're doing it because they've realised it's financially in their.
There's money.
And they were leaving a lot of money on the table, but they had to be bright enough to realise that, and it wasn't a illusion.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing to say in their credit is that they have got their fingers on the pulse of what's happening in video games culturally. A lot of the onus is on the indie scene at the moment.
Yeah. But I mean, you can see what I mean from the company's point of view. If you think about it, I mean, it is free money because the work's already done. The games are just sitting there. Why wouldn't you want them on your platform?
Quite right. And of course, these days you've got absolute phenomena that are occurring in the indie scene that actually change the way video games are made. You've had things like Undertale, like The Binding of Isaac, things like Pathologic 2,
Yeah.
things like Disco Elysium. Disco Elysium has gotten a lot of attention from a lot of big outlets, you know?
Yeah, and look, the ripple effects of it. I mean, I don't know enough about the game, but I'm confident, based on just the conversations I've seen around it, that it's going to have ripple effects.
Oh, yeah.
People are going to react to it in all kinds of interesting ways, and it's going to develop its, I mean, who knows if it will become a subgenre or if it will just, but it's clear that there's a, it's impacting the conversation, it's impacting the wider sphere in interesting ways.
Oh, definitely. Like people who enjoy not only consuming video games but creating them are talking about Disco Elysium.
Yeah.
As something that they never expected to see ever in any market, in any medium, anywhere. It's changed, like you said, it's changed the conversation about video games.
And that's thrilling. And that's not something that, I mean, that isn't something a major company can do, because they just can't. They can't take that kind of risk.
Well, they're hamstrung, aren't they? They're hamstrung by the need to create a popular piece of work.
Well, yeah, and you just can't take that kind of risk with your investors' money. You just can't do it. It's not.
That's right. That's true.
For that you need the indies that are willing to, that don't. I mean, bluntly, that don't care. That
don't care. Yeah, it's absolutely true. There is a power to that.
Yeah, and are just chasing the passion wherever it goes. Yeah.
And there are so many of these little kitchen sink developers now, so many of them from across the face of the world who are creating these amazing pieces of work, and very often really showing up the big studios.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly in terms of creativity. One of the things I find interesting about them is that the way they make a virtue of necessity with regards to art style and graphics and things like that. That's something I'm perpetually fascinated by. I mean, we're both, I think, fairly big Binding of Isaac's fans.
Huge.
That is a game that absolutely it's interesting. You can tell, obviously, it's been made by someone who didn't have an infinite art budget. I mean, they just did.
Right.
But the way I can't think of another way of putting it. In the particular case of that creator, he's weaponized that.
Yes.
I think to create this incredibly the art style of that is just absolutely stunning.
And it's happening again and again and again and again, even to the point whereby the art style actually becomes part of the mythology or part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, as a concrete example, I remember I think it was our friend Rowan, mutual friend, who was playing it, and just said, apropos of nothing on Twitter, one of the things about playing this game that I find absolutely mind-blowing is how different your Isaac avatar looks at the end of the game, depending on what path you've happened to take through it, like what interactions you've happened to have with the various things, because everything that Isaac touches changes him, physically changes.
Yes.
And you can end up completely unrecognizable lump by the end of the game.
Yes.
It's just
there are some combinations of items that render Isaac unrecognizable.
Yeah, absolutely. And
if you get transformation upon transformation upon transformation, which is possible now.
Absolutely. And the way they stack, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of work actually went in behind, under the hood to make that stacking process work.
Of course.
It's quite extraordinary. And he's right, sometimes you look at it like, I mean, what is that?
Yeah, right. So
around this dungeon.
One of the great joys of playing Isaac, of course, beyond anything else, beyond looking at all the weird synergies between the items, which are basically infinite at this point, is seeing how the Isaac avatar ultimately turns out.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a real thrill, isn't it, to just be like, what's he turning into on this run?
Right. I mean, with this combination of pills, this combination of this and that, and there's even the little mirror thing now. There's in every the main room that you drop down into in every floor that leads off into all the other areas. There's a little mirror in the top right hand corner. You can go to that and you can alter the avatar.
Right, yes.
You can customize it.
Yeah. Oh.
Which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I would think. It's so crazed, though.
I mean, I've sunk a lot of time into that recently. I've been trying to do the ultra hard challenge. I mean, have you played that?
I haven't played the new version at all. I'm still playing I'm still playing through the previous incarnation.
The ultra hard challenge is exactly what it says on the tin. I can't make any headway in that.
Right.
it's bonkers. I mean, Isaac is a hard game anyway. Ultra hard. There are no heart drops.
Oh.
There are only very finite ways of replenishing health. You have to do it through like certain cards or certain pills.
God. And of course
there are no soul heart drops.
Oh, what? No.
Yeah, there are no soul heart drops, no black heart drops. A lot of the items that replenish health have been neutered.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So all of the enemies are champions. Every single one. All of the floors are XL floors.
Right, yeah.
And in every floor, you have the amnesia and labyrinth curses.
For Christ's sakes.
And in order to finish it, you've got to defeat Mega Satan.
Oh, for God's sake. I mean, that sounds, as far as I'm concerned, functionally impossible, I've got to say.
It's, Isaac always relies upon the luck of the RNG to a certain degree. Ultra hard, that factor is magnified to the power of n. So I've realized that if the first 2 items on the first XL floor are bunk, forget it. Quit.
Yeah, sure.
Quit. You need a very particular combination of items to do ultra hard, and it must be only like once in a blue moon. And that the RNG will give them to you.
Just to give you a chance, by the way. We're not even...
Yeah.
Because then you've still got to actually play it, which presumably
require
a fairly high level of skill to get through all of that nonsense.
I've gotten to the womb once.
Wow.
And that was just through luck, you know?
Sounds like something I'll never do. I'm just hearing that, I'm like, yeah, let's not even bother.
I'm kind of addicted to trying it now. Because I've done all the other challenges. I've actually done all the others at this point. So I want to beat it.
Yeah. And it is that's the thing about Isaac, isn't it? It is a very addictive game because of that. I mean, I think...
You know what's really weird? It's going back to play any of the other modes after playing that. It seems so easy.
Oh, right?
It's ridiculous.
And checking your
The only other thing I really want to do, have you ever seen the character that you can play called the Lost?
Yeah, I have.
So the Lost is a ghost version of Isaac, and it starts out being able to fly and being able to pass through barriers and whatnot, but it can't take any hits at all.
Right, okay.
There's no health, so it's a one-hit kill.
Jeez.
And you can't upgrade its health. Right.
Yeah.
So it is one of the ultimate Isaac challenges.
Yeah, that sounds pretty. So you've got to play through the whole dungeon and not get hit.
And not get hit.
I don't think I could do that.
What a challenge, eh?
I really don't think I could.
I don't know how you do certain bosses. Like, how would you do It Lives?
Yeah, I don't know.
The bullet hell of It Lives. I don't know how. And there are...
won't be able to beat Mum's heart, to be honest.
Right. I just don't know. I don't know how you do certain things with that build. The only way I could think is if you're phenomenally lucky and you get certain items, like what's the one that allows you to take a hit and it negates the first hit you take in every room?
Yeah, I can't remember, but I know what you mean, yeah.
I think it's Scapular.
Right.
If you can get Scapular,
yeah, you might.
Maybe.
But...
And maybe if you get a suite of orbitals that can take the hits for you.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? You want as many cubes of meat and like that, and
balls of bandages and pretty flies and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's your best.
That's the only thing I can think of.
But I guess the advantage of it is if you can fly, you can loot pretty much every room, because I know that is one of the brilliant. I mean, Isaac is a game that's built on intentional player frustration, but one of the brilliant frustrations of Isaac is when you're going through those first 2 or 3 levels and you're just like, oh man, I can see all this treasure and I can't reach it.
I can't get it. I haven't got the bomb to access this area or whatever.
And that early game, I mean, I'm sure people on the internet would have game theoried it out to within an inch of its life because it's a popular game, but figuring out the resource management in those early 2 or 3 levels, is it worth using your one bomb to open that black stone and maybe get a couple of blue hearts? Those kind of calculations.
They can make or break your game, can't they?
And the key, like, what's the earliest level you should realistically use the key to open a shop? Especially if they're scarce, because obviously you want the first one for the gold room where you're guaranteed something, right?
Yep.
Free, but then how much money do you need to make it worthwhile using that other key on the shop and risking not being able to get in the gold room on the next level? All of that.
Do I gamble? Do I min-max? Do I open the gambling room?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the gambling room, there's that thing of like, have I got enough bombs to blow up everything in the gambling room and get pay out that way kind of thing.
I mean, you can break Isaac over your knee with gambling.
Yeah, absolutely.
You really can. I mean, there are certain ways of breaking that game with gambling.
Yeah. But,
I've watched videos of some of, those people who, like, when Isaac first came out, who made their entire channels.
Yeah.
Like Biznap and Northern Lion. Biznap, I've seen Biznap like just excoriate Isaac. just break it over his knee, with gambling.
Right.
Like in the first floor, he's managed to like make an unbeatable character through gambling.
Nice. And that,
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, just understanding the intricacies of how the mechanics of it work, right? And
just being so familiar with the game that they know that Isaac starts with the dice, so if I have this many recharges, the likelihood of this item turning up is really high.
God, it's so great.
Yeah. Craziness. My biggest failing in Isaac is I cannot resist the deals with the devil.
Oh no, I'm the same. I'm an absolute sucker for every single time, and you always think like, oh, I've got loads of soul hearts, I can afford to lose. And it's like, well, yeah, dude, but you don't get them back.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
And then suddenly I'm in the womb too, and I've got like friends. I'm like, oh.
Every single bloody time. The amount of great runs I bloody ruined.
Yeah.
Because I've thought, I can take that. I'm overpowered. I'm guppy now. I'm fine. I'm going to lose my last red heart. I'm fine.
The one for me is when you pick up, what is it? Is it like the Bible, which gives you a soul heart every 7 rooms or something?
So good.
And you just think like, I'll keep that. I'll grab a couple of batteries. I'll be fine, And
you'll be all right. Yeah, I'll be fine. No. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you're lucky, there are certain builds that work brilliantly with that.
Right. But yeah,
like the Whore of Babylon.
Yeah.
The Whore of Babylon build. If you've got it's the Book of Revelations that gives you the soul heart. It's brilliant because the Whore of Babylon just maxes out your damage if you're below half a normal heart.
Right. Yeah.
So if you're running entirely on soul or black hearts, you're well away. You have permanent Whore of Babylon on.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. It's brilliant, but you've got to get that build running.
Yeah. And the other thing about Deal with the Devil is sooner or later you run into Krampus, and then you're like,
Yep. Run into Krampus.
Or again.
And don't get me wrong, I mean, if you do manage to beat Krampus, you're either going to get the lump of coal, which is awesome, or you're going to get Krampus's head, which is also really good.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's not
but
it's not an easy fight. And
no, you've got to beat Krampus. That's the problem. And he can do all those abilities. So like the Krampus head 4-way brimstone.
Oh God, yeah.
He can do that. In fact, it's upgraded in the newer versions where he not only does it, it spins.
Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, it rotates through 180 degrees.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so you've got to be on... And he can also do like a diagonal one as well.
Oh, no, that's just no good at all.
Which is not fair, really, is it?
No, that's unacceptable.
But then again, it's Isaac, and like complaining about it not being fair is like, well, yeah.
Oh, it's hard, is it? Oh, I see.
Yeah. Oh, it's not fair. Yeah. It's not balanced, is it not? Slap me silly with a wet kipper, I would never have known.
You shocked me with your words.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what I've been playing. What have you been up to?
I haven't been playing a lot. I've been away for a week with the kid because we kind of we had some holidays booked earlier in the summer that we had to cancel because my missus
Of course.
COVID, which was
Right. I was going to ask actually, how is everyone?
no, everyone's fine. I mean, she's fine basically now. She definitely got I think we're calling it short long COVID. So
Right.
she definitely had some lingering effects for a couple of weeks after the main illness had passed. But I'd say she's probably like 90% back now.
Good.
So yeah, and you know, you feel that the direction of travel's fine. It's an odd thing in that what we learned about the illness was it's very much your progression is very sawtooth. So you have a lot of peaks and troughs, and you'll have them hour to hour and day to day. So you have good days and bad days, and within those days you'll have good hours and bad hours. You know what I mean? So it makes it quite difficult to kind of certainly until you get used to that, it makes it quite hard to plot recovery because
as a function presumably.
Well, that too, but I mean certainly. So I remember like end of day 3 or end of day 4. I mean, she'd been in bed until early evening, but she got up, sat in the garden in a dressing gown, came and sat and watched telly. And at the end of the evening, she looked at me and said, "Actually, I kind of feel all right." And then the next day, we were calling the paramedics because worried about her breathing. So like it really is sawtooth. That was still. I mean, day 4 was the worst day, so that was kind of the downward path. But that's the example of like how much it fluctuates.
Right.
3 we were, I was looking at it thinking, yeah, she probably is going to be all right. And then day 4, it was like, okay, you're out of breath, getting out of bed. This is no good. And the paramedics were amazing, but they basically said, look, we'll give you an oxygen monitor. If the oxygen drops below 95, she's going to have to come in. If it doesn't, you can't do anything that you can't do at home, so she's better off here, right?
Of course, yeah.
Which is right, and she was, and her oxygen never dropped below, I think 97 even, so she was fine. But and she got through it. It was okay. And the recovery's been similarly sawtooth. So she's definitely, I mean, she's miles and miles better than she was 2 weeks ago. Still, again, on an hour-to-hour basis, she can overdo it and need to kind of,
Yeah, and that is a prolonged period, isn't it? It's a long time to be feeling ill or not 100%.
Yeah, it is. And so we had some holiday we had to cancel, but we took some last week. This week went up to see my mum, and that was really nice. And
brilliant.
A couple of days away together as well, with mum doing the babysitting, and that was good too. So she's definitely on the mend, and that's been nice.
Awesome, that's great to hear.
Yeah, so I'm kind of feeling all right about that, and kind of it's almost like it's weird. It's almost like you kind of almost like you kind of go into cocoon mode when that sort of stuff's going on. You kind of there's a lot of practical considerations, so you just kind of get on with it. But I'm kind of just now really starting to reconnect with the world, I guess, a level like I'm
sort of coming out, back into the world.
I haven't been on social media very much. I haven't recorded any podcasts. I haven't done much writing. It's all been just kind of focused. It's kind of nice to just be feeling like things were okay enough that we can start opening stuff back up again. And
it's turned a corner, which is good.
So that's all good. But no, I haven't think about play. I haven't really been playing much. I mean, Fortnite with the kid continues to be. It's really,
of course,
you can just get like a half hour, an hour, and a couple of games together in a night, and it's really fun. It's really fun, kind of, because it's so collaborative if you're playing in a duo team, or sometimes one of her mates will jump on. But it's like, that's cool. It's really good. And she's still like the sniper queen of Bletchley, so I still have. Still, like, I swear to God, the tactic is still right, Dad. You charge at them with a shotgun, and while they're distracted by you charging with a shotgun, I'll take their head off, and it works.
Oh, you're the bait. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I just
brilliant
zigzag, firing me automatic weapons, and trying to take the shields down, and then she just pops them off, man.
Isn't that a weird
Ow!
Isn't that a great thing though? I mean, like our generation couldn't really play video games without parents.
No, it's exactly. I think it's fantastic, and I really, one of the things that I like about Fortnite, it's maybe one of the things that do make me think about going back to the kind of conversation about video game design. I do miss the thing that they used to do in the early first-person shooters and some other games like Fallout. They did this. You could scale the violence.
Yes.
Scale the graphic nature of the violence. And I remember, because of Fallout, I particularly remember having, you could turn it off. So it would literally just be like, if you shot someone, there'd just be like a spark effect and they'd move. And then when they die, just, a corpse sprite would appear, right? From that to the ultra-violent setting, where
where things would explode.
Exactly, like limbs flew off. And it was like the execution scene from Robocop every time. And I like that look of try. And I like because there's quite a few games that I'd like to play with it that I just can't because they're just
because of the content. Yeah.
Started playing Ark, and that's just about okay. That's just about which is the like kind of Minecraft with dinosaurs and really good graphics. But you do have to kind of beat up the monsters, the dinosaurs. You have for meat and stuff, and there is a blood spray, and it's a bit kind of
a bit much. Yeah.
She's all right with it, but it's that thing of like I just wish she had an option to just turn that off. Everything else about the game you could keep mechanics, and it's just a weird. I was thinking about it. It's a weird thing where video games have got in this space where it's like, well, we're grown-ups, so we have to have, Yeah, but surely that's not a difficult thing to program in as a toggle.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? Because it's an option that actually doesn't exist in most video games now.
They don't do it anymore, and it's a weird thing for me because again, I just feel like they're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, of course.
And it is a bit limiting, but yeah, I mean, it's one of the many things that makes Fortnite such an incredible piece of design. It's just the cartoony thing, the fact that when someone dies, they literally just explode in a shower of loot, and then like a little drone flies down to monitor the death. Just flies down and like scans where their body was, and
well, it certainly worked, hasn't it? I mean, it's caught a zeitgeist. I mean, it's like the game that's associated with the current generation of young people, isn't it?
Yeah, someone probably already has, but someone at some point is going to write a book about Fortnite if they haven't already.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, yeah, like the cultural relevance of Fortnite.
It's really incredible. It's really, and it is at its core, it's a really, really impressive piece of design. I mean, I love how it happened by accident. That's what I love about it. Like, it was supposed to be a PvE game, right? That was the original conception. Right. And then they created the PvP battle royale as an add-on, as a kind of throwaway, and that ended up being the thing that became the phenomenon,
Right. So it's actually not the main game that became popular.
That's right. And yet that's the thing now that everyone does. And what the genius of it was, I still think the smartest thing that Fortnite does from a game design standpoint is the fact that you cannot buy success. I still think that is like, you can spend as much money as you want on Fortnite, but all you're doing is buying skins.
Yes, it's not like an upgrade. It's not pay to win.
Exactly, which so many games of that kind are inherently. I mean, the mobile games with the microtransactions and stuff, but this one is like it works. And they make a ton of money because kids always do a new thing, whatever it is. And Pester Power is still, an incredible kind of way of getting parents' wallets open.
Of course.
The core game is free, and you cannot buy success. If you are good at Fortnite, you are good at Fortnite because you're good at Fortnite.
So there's like a skill factor involved as well. So there's like genuine bragging rights to be had.
Exactly, and they've even what I love is that the other thing they've done is they've split off the two modes. So there's the battle royale where it's you versus. I don't think the matchmaking is completely random, but it's fairly close. And then there's a competitive. There's an arena mode, which has leagues. And
right,
you can play those, and again they're free to play. But the way the leagues work is once you get beyond a certain point, there's like a currency. It's called hype, right, which is the currency in the league games, and you have to gain a certain amount of hype to go up a league.
Got you.
Once you get to I think League 4 or 5, it starts costing you hype every time you play a match.
Right. Okay.
So in order to get to the higher leagues, in order to get to the top leagues, you actually have to score more points than it costs you. So you really have to be very good at that point. You see what I mean? You have to.
Yeah.
You score points for getting to the last 25, getting to the last 10, winning, obviously, and then you score points depending on how many people you kill. And it's amazing how hard that gets.
I can imagine. I mean, I can imagine. Like, I've seen like some of the people who play certain video games who do it on Twitch and whatnot, and it's like all they do is play a particular video game. Like, that's it. That's basically their life.
Yeah.
And the stuff they can do in those video games is unreal.
Isn't it? Yeah. It's true. I mean, I remember when we talked about Half-Life, we talked about a run through. I told you speed run, and it was
speedrunners.
It was like 28 minutes to get through Half-Life, and I was like, I actually thought it was a cut together compilation, and it was like, no, someone actually did this.
Yeah, right. But just by like exploiting glitches and stuff like that.
That insanity, and I was like, oh my god, this is crazy.
I've seen people do that with like the FromSoft games, you know, like Bloodborne and Dark Souls, like speed run them.
Speed run Dark Souls, that's disease.
I'm like, what?
What is wrong with you?
First of all, why would you ever even conceive of doing that?
How would that pop into your head in the first place? Yeah, I don't.
Right. Except maybe that's it. Maybe that's the perversity of it. It's like, yeah, it is the unspeed runnable game.
Yeah, I could see that actually. Well, the thing is, I don't think Dark Souls isn't, because I think like that. What hurts about those games is if you are good enough, you can actually. I mean, there is a leveling mechanic, and it does get easier, but fundamentally, if your reactions are good enough and you've got the control scheme like mastered,
you can do it. Yeah,
do it theoretically.
There are ways of breaking that game. I found a few ways of breaking that game. I mean, one of the things I always do when Dark Souls 1, the original Dark Souls, you know that you've got like a choice of ways when you first start the game. So you can go down to like the catacombs where all the skeletons are. Yep. You shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't do that, because if you will get stuck, you will die. Yeah. But if you can manage it, if you can run down into those catacombs, if you can avoid all of those bastard skeletons and the archers and the bloody necromancers, there's a way of getting down into Nito's tomb, and you can get, the blade that he gives you as part of his covenant, and that spell.
Oh.
That's insane, that causes like spears to shoot up from the ground.
I'd imagine that's quite useful early on.
You can get both of them before you've gotten a single level up. It's possible.
That's crazy.
And if you can do it, does it break the game?
Yeah, right. Because that.
Oh my god! Because that blade, that incredible blade that Nito gives you, it doesn't require much in the way of stats to wield. So all you do then, once you've got it, is fanny about at the beginning of the game, just killing a few skeletons and things until you've got the right stats.
Sure. Oh.
And like the big bovine demon that you fight on the bridge, like Taurus demon.
Yeah.
You can kill it in 2 hits with that blade. It's ridiculous.
That's quite. Yeah, it took me considerably more than 2 hits when I played it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there are ways of doing it. I mean, they've successfully bred those mechanics out of later games.
Well, look, I think that's part of the push-pull with video games, isn't it? There's always it's almost like a war between the players and the creators to try and players try and find mechanics, glitches, edges, whatever you want, various different things. I mean, they'll
always do it.
They will always do it. Well, I mean, I think still my favourite all time. I mean, we've talked about it before, but the solo eggplant run in Spelunky remained my gold standard for that. That is just great. And I love the fact the creator openly came out and said, "I didn't intend for this to be possible, but I'm so happy that it is. I'm not going to like. I could fix it. I could go in the code and fix it, but I don't want to because
so often that happens as well.
Yeah. And I do, that's the one for me, because that's just because I think because I was getting into Spelunky when I heard about it and I watched the video and I just couldn't, I knew enough about playing the game to know how impressive that was. That first, I know a bunch of people have done it since, but that original solo eggplant run is just.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Beauty. It's an absolute thing of beauty to watch.
But it's funny how long that's been happening. Like, do you remember I think it was in Mortal Kombat 3, they introduced a character called Ermac.
Right.
He's like a red ninja. He's like Scorpion and Sub-Zero, but he's red. The reason he turns up is because there was an error message that would play on certain arcade cabinets of Mortal Kombat 2 that would just come up as Ermac. And Ermac was an error message.
Oh, right.
But it spawned the myth that, people would say on playgrounds, there's this hidden character called Ermac.
Yeah.
And in order to access him, you have to do this, you have to do that. It's complete bullshit. It never happened, but they cottoned on. They heard about it. The creators heard about it and thought, we'll introduce it as a character then.
It's so fun, that, isn't it, when you get that kind of that feedback, that creativity loop feedback, and
I love it. No. I'll be honest, I absolutely love it. When they've got when they're close enough to the fan base that they know what's going on culturally.
I think it takes a confidence to do that too, and I think social media's made it made it easier in some ways. Funny enough, I was thinking about this in terms of there's this. Mobile game I've been playing for a few months now called Marvel Strike Force, which is a kind of What I like about it is that it's got that, for me, the perfect blend of it's a combat action game, but it's also on the macro level, it's a resource management game, because you expand your roster by fighting battles, and that gives you more characters, and then you start building teams. And as the game develops, you unlock more game modes, you unlock more, you can create more teams. There are natural built-in synergies that the game develops, so it pushes you down to, you get your Wave 1 Avengers together, and they have various synergies between them when you'd expect that. But it is also possible to kind of discover or synthesize teams by taking a couple from one and 3 from another, sticking them together, and they create really interesting synergies there as well. So there is some creativity to it. But one of the things I was reading about on this game was the situation happened where and this is a classic example of the feedback loop. So one of the creators did an interview, and it transpired that what he was doing was he had some kind of data analytics tool that was monitoring all of the Marvel Strike Force conversations that were happening on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit. Right. Because Reddit's obviously, because it's a mobile game, you get a lot of conversation around.
Of course, Reddit's like the best resource, I suppose, in that regard.
Exactly. And he said that what they do then is they look for trending topics, trending characters, and they'd let that guide them a little bit in terms of what they were doing. So and he gave a concrete example of some character that was getting named a lot. So they did some event that involved that character to get the buzz built up a bit. I think it was Emma Frost was the character, because she was really powerful in a particular meta at a particular moment.
Got you.
They decided, but then what happened was, because as soon as the interview went out, someone on Reddit said, right, let's do a whole thing where we say, like, where we talk about gold, because there's never enough gold in the game, and America Chavez, let's pretend she's really overpowered. She's not. She's some random, she's not. She's right in the middle of the roster. She's not important. But let's all bang on about, that went up on Reddit, and within 48 hours, the official Marvel Strike Force account is tweeting out saying America Chavez picks only, and they got it.
Awesome.
What was going on, and they started playing with it, and then the guys, I guess whatever the gamer equivalent of showrunner is, took a photo of himself and put it on Instagram. It's him reading an America Chavez comic and just grinning over the top of it. I know
awesome.
Playing that.
I kind of love that.
Oh, I do. It's really fun.
I mean, it makes me wonder just how far off we are from a video game that's so complex or so evolved that it actually responds to trends like that.
I mean, I think it will happen. I think they will figure out ways to do that. The other thing I think about is how they'll use AI to learn, to have learning opponents. I think that's the thing I'm interested in as well. So AI opponents that genuine, because at the moment I think AI opponents really tend to mechanically move along kind of line of best fit. That's my. I mean, that could be bollocks, but that's all.
No, it's very finite at the moment.
Yeah, and it looks like basically with most AIs, they're clicking along an optimizer, right? You've got settings from, my 5-year-old picked up the controller to perfect, right? And there's maybe 4 or 5 clicks in between for difficulty settings. But I think what's more interesting to me is where it's genuinely responsive. So, I mean, it doesn't count in Fortnite because there aren't bots. But the example of Fortnite would be if we were playing against bots and the bots started to learn that if I was charging at them with a shotgun, it meant that daughter was standing on the hill with a sniper rifle, right?
So you get genuinely learning NPCs in a video game.
Data's there, right? I mean, again, with Fortnite, it doesn't matter because it's all PvP, so that you don't get. But the data's there, and the data would be there. I mean, the one I always think of is COD Zombies, because I know that that's a game that's got many tens of millions of player hours sunk into it now, and I'm sure that the people who make Call of Duty have, at this point, certainly for the last couple of iterations, will have all the data on every game.
Of course, I should think so. Yeah,
be connected back to the servers now, because everything's online. Everything's got that online connectivity. So
right.
PS5, and I can't help but think they're going to use that data at some point if they're not already, as part to inform design.
Yes, and I would have thought technologically as well, certainly with the current crop of consoles, we're nearing the point where the power is there.
Absolutely, because that is the other problem, isn't it? Is the processing power. And for me, it's like the drive for the last, as long as I've been playing video games, really, the drive has relentlessly been through graphics. That's always the thing that everyone wants to use the processing power for is to produce like the, it's always that thing, I want it to look realistic, I want it to look, and it's, it's interesting to me. I mean, funnily enough, that the FMV Dead End was part of that as well, wasn't it, in a way?
Of course.
Trying for there. And it's fascinating to me because I think my stepson's got a PS5 and I've had a quick look at it, and I can't really see the graphical improvement yet from the 4. I really can't. I can see the 3 to the 4. I can see the change. It's not massive, by the way, but it is there. But I can't. Mainly, it's draw distance in the 4. That I notice. But the 4 and the 5, I'm not seeing a huge amount of graphical improvement. I'm sure there's stuff going on under the hood, but there comes a point where the human eye doesn't detect it anymore.
Right. So there is a kind of like absolute ceiling for all of this, isn't there?
Yes and no. I mean, you can produce 8K and 16K, but the chances are the eyeball won't be able to tell the difference between 4K and 16K. So what's
right?
But you don't.
So there must be other avenues to go.
What are they going to do with the processing power instead? And I think you're right. I think AI's got to be one of the things that they do.
Well, it's certain things like I can't imagine why they haven't followed them. Like, for example, there was a sort of murder mystery horror game about a decade ago on the PC, and it actually utilized the internet and email to play the game. So it was basically a murder mystery. You were trying to solve the murder, and the killer would contact you through your email address.
Yeah, I got a feeling my dad might have played that, actually, because that's ringing a bell, yeah.
Why hasn't that been capitalized on now?
Well, I mean, that's interesting as well, because that, for me, sits in that liminal space between video game and interactive fiction, right? You
right.
do with that. On that side of things, it could be really exciting.
I mean, can you imagine what you could do with that format and like your phone and your Twitter account?
I was going to say social media, right? I mean,
WhatsApp and the potential is huge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it hasn't really. It's like the on and off trend with VR.
Yeah.
You know, when the VR helmet was last released for the PS4, elements of it were fantastic, like revolutionary for horror.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I had horror experiences on that damn thing I've never had before. Like Resident Evil 7 was made to be played with that. It was actually designed around that, and I'm telling you, it's terrifying.
Sure.
It does something, and I didn't expect it. It does something to the lizard part of your brain, but it turns off all critical faculty. You feel like you are there.
I mean, it's funny enough, because my really I've played a few of the VR games with the 4 because we got it with the VR for kiddo, and we played a few different things on it. I mean, we got the Iron Man VR because she was big into the Marvel at that point.
Right.
Fine, but the controls just didn't quite. I mean, it was using the
didn't match up,
and it was just like it was a real faff. But the experience I had actually that I found really vivid, in a similar level to what you're talking about, was the Star Wars Squadrons.
Yes,
and I think it's because actually you're in a fixed point. You're sat in a cockpit of a X-wing or a TIE fighter, and that was just viscerally exciting. It's like, obviously, like, you know, we grew up on those movies, right? And so I'm in an X-wing.
Yeah, it's a fantasy of like anyone who loves those films.
And you've got the sound, and you've got the visual design of the cockpit, which and you know, obviously you move your head around and you're looking inside the cockpit, right? You can see the controls and all that kind of thing, and then that sound behind you, that roaring sound, and then there's a TIE fighter just shoots past you. You know, with that specific engine sound that TIE fighters have, that childhood, you know. And I was just like, oh man, like
very exciting, right?
Star Wars. I am in the stars having a war, and it was
right.
It was just like, and I only did a couple of afternoons of it, you know, because like I have things to do, unfortunately. But I just, it was magic, absolutely magic.
Yeah, I totally agree, but it hasn't been capitalized on a great deal, has it?
No, and it's that weird thing of like I feel like they haven't quite figured out what they're doing. It reminds me of the early days of the internet where people were trying all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
and cross promotional stuff, and the early days of QR codes were like that as well, weren't there? With something QR codes were everywhere, but they didn't really link to anything interesting, so it hasn't. And again, I feel like that one's just starting to spark.
it does seem to be baby steps, doesn't it? Like there's these odd moments where something revolutionary happens. I mean, that for me was the big one. It was the horror stuff. I think it's tailor-made for horror. I don't think there's anything scarier in media thus far.
Well, it's the immersion, isn't it? And that's the thing is that horror is always trying to. That's what horror is always trying to do. Because horror is, I mean, as we've talked about before, you know, when you dig right down to it, part of the reason it's so hard to categorize is because horror is an emotion, not a genre.
It's visceral,
response,
isn't it?
rather than being a genre, which is why it's so slippery to define when you're not trying to nail it down, even though we all think we know what it is. And I think that nothing has greater potential than something that can control so many of your senses at once. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's the definition of immersion, and that's what we're always trying to achieve when we're trying to create that effect for people.
Well, I do know that like a lot of people, because I liked to play Resident Evil 7 communally with people around me because it's so much fun when you've got that VR helmet on. My friend Ray, he tried it. He put it on once when we were in like the main hall of the main house where all the action happens, and he looked around for about a minute and he just went, nope. Took it off. He said, not a chance. Not a chance.
I respect that, you know. That's
because it does feel so real. It's frightening, you know.
Yeah, and I do. I respect that. You can have that experience, and just be like, yeah, that's not for me, and that's perfectly reasonable.
Well, I struggle to explain what it was like because it's not like video game fear. It's not like roller coaster fear. It's not like ghost train ride fear. Something about it felt real.
Well, I think it's because you've got I think it is because of the sensory thing. Your entire visual field is taken up, so you can't look away like you could in a movie. You can't, so that's part of it. And I also think something that people underestimate about VR and how important it is the 3D sound. That's the other aspect, because actually we don't, outside of real life, we don't experience 3D sound very much. You get it at the cinema.
Of course.
Most people's home cinema setup isn't quite there. If we're honest, and also it's diffused by the fact that it's ambient. That does change the experience. But when you've got earbuds, you're
in it,
and the earbuds also close out sound from outside. So everything you're hearing is what's being piped through to you. So there is that element of control that the game designers have over your environment. It's completely unprecedented. So I'm not surprised that it feels very visceral.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the indie game developers who specialize in horror video games, they utilize sound in such a beautiful way, and they always advise you to wear headphones when playing their games because you need that soundscape to make them work.
Yeah, no, it's so important. It's so. I mean, that's it's something even going back to Fortnite, but it uses directional sound, and you don't have the sound up and you don't have a directional sound. You're playing at a significant disadvantage because you can. People are running, and you can hear where guns are being fired and the direction they're coming from. And if you don't have that kind of a setup, you're absolutely playing at a disadvantage. And that's just a little combat game, right? For a horror.
It's amazing to think, isn't it? Because it's like a conversation that it's quite new, really, in video games. It has been happening for a reasonable amount of time in any real world sense. But in terms of the history of video games and media, this is kind of a new conversation, the significance of soundscapes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yet, what I think for me, what's fascinating is both that it feels very new, and yet weirdly, it also feels like overnight it became business as usual. That's what's fascinating to me. Is that you kind of can't imagine video games not doing it now.
Well, it's something we've already spoken about on this show, which is of course Half-Life. Half-Life was for many it was that turning point.
Absolutely was, and I still rate the AI experience of fighting those soldiers as being one of the most impressive and kind of scary things happen to me in a video game. The way.
Well, we'd never had it before, had we?
But the way the soldiers, I don't know if they did adapt or if they just had so many different patterns of behaviour. Felt like they were adapting, but they scare. I mean, I know I've talked about it before on the show, but the first time I crouched behind a crate and a grenade came over it and landed next to me, I was just like, holy shit! I'd never seen anything like.
No,
they just walk at you and shoot, or maybe they zigzag and shoot, or maybe they run at you shoot. But that, or maybe they just stand at a distance and shoot, right? But those are
Yeah.
you can't say, oh, he's hidden behind a crate, I'll throw a grenade. Like, what the fuck just happened?
Right. I mean, the notion of video game enemies coordinating
Oh
against
god.
you,
Yeah.
forming plans and like trying to bottleneck
Trying to
you.
bottleneck you, running a decoy. That was the other one I remember, was the decoy. Seeing someone running, like, zigzagging between pillars, and I'm trying to get... Someone shoots me in the back. I was like, what?
Yeah, I had never encountered that in video games before.
Like it. And actually, for quite a few years after, I didn't experience anything.
Right, I mean, well, there are still lessons that haven't really been learned, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
there are still a lot of video games where it is just a case, oh, they'll just come running at you. You know?
I'm entirely convinced the AI in Half-Life 2 was as good as in Half-Life either, to be honest. I mean, that's interesting in and of itself. Although, yeah, I don't know, maybe that's false memory, or maybe it's because I played Half-Life 2 so many years later and I was used to it by then.
Maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean, I haven't played Half-Life 2 enough to say, to be honest. My memories of it are a bit vaguer than Half-Life 1.
Yeah, and I do think you can't underestimate the power of the shock of revelation, you know. Because, I mean, the other game we talked about before was Deus Ex, and you were like, that was revolutionary. It is basically unplayable now. Like, you...
Oh, yeah. I mean,
you know.
It hurts.
Right.
Like, it hurts to play now. It's
yeah.
It's so clunky. Like, the interface is so clunky.
But that one, again, I mean, we talked about it, but like the storytelling and that was what impressed me. The whole thing about that conversation I had with that friend of mine where I was like, man, I was gutted when my brother got killed. And that long pause, he was like, my brother didn't get killed. What? Like,
yeah,
no,
right.
Because that was like the entire story pivoted around that moment. How can your version of the game be different? Like, and then I had to go back and replay it.
Yeah. You play it again.
Not a cutscene. Actually, I can interact at any point to stop this. Oh my!
Make a different decision. Yeah. Do you kill Gunther when the game kind of asks you to, or do you not?
The thing about it is that up to that point, there had been games with branching narratives. It was possible, but they were always signposts.
Yeah.
I remember Jedi Knight 2, or Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight. That had a great kind of branching moment where you joined the light side or the dark side, and it was really cool. Like, it was, it was fun, but it was very mechanical, and
it's very binary, isn't it? You know, you go this way or you go that way.
And basically, the only thing that it really changed in terms of the game was which boss fights you then had to go through, because it depended on which Jedi you were then going to kill to get to the end of the game. But it was still, and it, like, narratively, it was a cool moment, but it was so clearly signposted all through the game. You've got this dark meter, light meter, and it's moving up and down depending on whether or not you shoot innocents or, whatever, you do, like, you kill baddies or whatever, and it's constant. So you know where you are. And you know at a certain point in the game it's going to slam down and cut off. But the Deus Ex scene was completely different. It was.
I honestly was shocked when I realised what the game was doing. Because I think it takes you a while to understand just how complex it is, doesn't it?
It sets you up too, because it does open with a couple of cutscenes, and they are actually cutscenes, and they're not responsive and they're not interactive. So it almost cheats, because it puts you in that frame of mind, and you're like, okay, but what? Yeah, but the point at which you realise there's a dialogue scene and it looks like a cutscene, but it's not. You have control. You can walk away. You can pull your gun and shoot the guy who's talking to you. You can taser him. You can whatever. Like, and it was like, what?
Right. And like, when you realise that the routes you choose to take through the different missions will determine like things that happen way later on in the game.
Yeah. No.
You'll find somebody in some like scrutty little flat in Hell's Kitchen that is locked. It's like locked with a code, and you can either hack it or you can bomb your way in, or you can get in through a ventilation shaft. And that character turns up later on, like way later on, if you talk to them and if you say the right things.
Yeah. But the other thing was about Deus Ex, though, it was in service of a story. I mean, one of the things, and I'm sure, again, someone will have written about this, but one of the, I think, very impressive things about it is the number of branches there must be in that game, and yet there are only 3 endings.
There are only 3 endings, yeah.
They narrow again at the other end somehow. The storytelling bends back towards, and I'd love to see a map of how that plays out sometime, just because it's impressive. It's impressive on a storytelling sense. But the thing for me is that what's changed, the path that we basically went down, I think, with this kind of storytelling in games was the GTA path, where it's open world, which is great, and you can do what you want, and you can just spend all day goofing around, jacking cars and running over hookers if you want, or on shooting sprees if you want. But then you've got like this artificial main story mode, and then it's like, oh, we're back in cutscenes, and then you have to do the thing, whatever. And it, like, I don't know, I feel like there was some kind of middle ground, there's some kind of path that Deus Ex hinted at.
It's always underbaked, isn't it? That's the problem. Like, the main story of these sandbox open world games always feels tacked on.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, I played just a very few hours of, I think it was Far Cry 4 because it was one of the last games I got for the 3, and I was just sort of, and the environment was beautiful. It was I think, and it was wonderful, and I liked the kind of the feeling of open worldness that it gave. And I thought, oh look, you can go chasing these, I can't even remember the details of it now, but there's like a dozen different blips on the map, and each one of them will set off a different kind of mission. You can go and have an explore, whatever. And it was nice, but there was always that nagging feeling underneath of like, yeah, but really it's not open world, because really it's the main story, and that is on the rails, and you will have to do the things and hit the beat. For me, again, I come back to that thing. My brother died. No, he didn't. You don't have that kind of control in video games.
No, you're absolutely right. There is it's an illusion of freedom, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess, look, in a way it wasn't Deus Ex, right? Because you ended up in the same 3 places. So in that sense it was. But it sure as hell didn't feel like it on the way through.
No, and when you started to realise that you could do these things, like you could tackle almost even like the most minor interaction in a myriad different ways, I still struggle to sort of comprehend that.
It was so cool, and the game explicitly told you that because of how the build worked, the way that you could have a no-kill stealth character in Deus Ex if you wanted. You could work towards that kind of silent assassin character if you wanted, or you could absolutely turn it into more of a kind of traditional FPS by just ranking up all your gun skills and your weapon skills, and you could go down that route.
You could even go down the melee route and just, physically violent.
Yeah. They needed to work on the melee system a bit, if I remember rightly. It wasn't.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, it's possible, but you need you only really hit that point where you are like a tank towards the end.
Yeah. And again, that's one of those things where that's something where the mechanically they'd figure out how to do that stuff better with stuff like Dark Souls and Demon Souls and stuff.
Of course, and of course the later Deus Ex games. I mean, Human Revolutions was fantastic.
Yeah, it was actually. That one got, I think, a little bit unfairly overlooked. I think maybe it was the timing and when it came out. There was a lot.
Yeah,
and it did have that. Well, it had 2 problems. The boss fights felt out of place.
Oh, the boss fights.
And there was actually one of the boss fights was very near broken. If you took a particular upgrade at a certain point before it, you'd ended up having this situation where it was effectively like Robocop with Directive 4. Working, and it was like, I actually can't beat this boss right now, and I'm 2/3 of the way through the game, and I lost interest at that point, because it's like, that felt like actually like what we were talking earlier. It felt like Gary Gygax had taken over the game. You want this free upgrade that will give you extra? Oh yeah, I do want that. Ha ha ha!
And you can so tell that with the boss encounters in that game, it was like they came down from on high. Someone said you need to have a boss encounter in this game.
Sucked. It really did suck, and it didn't fit the story flow. It felt completely artificial. Suddenly you're stuck in this arena,
Yeah, badly programmed, awkward, janky.
And as I say, for me, I kind of slogged through it, but then I got to that thing where I'd taken the free upgrade, and then it without any prior knowledge, it completely kiboshed me in that fight. And I thought, actually, I don't want to play you anymore, game.
It's such a shame because there's such good stuff.
Yeah,
in that
and
game.
I will, at some point in the future, I'll pick it up and I'll just not take the upgrade and I'll play it through, because I wanted to see how the story played out.
I mean, what really shocked me is who I ended up siding with at the end. I mean, you've got that wonderful ideological dynamic between the humanists, the ones who are totally against transhumanism, completely full stop, and there are lots of good arguments for that presented in the game. Then on the other extreme, you've got Sarif, the industrialist who basically creates the transhumanist upgrades and whatnot. And there's a point where Sarif has this amazing soliloquy where he's talking to your character. It's not Denton in this one, is it? It's what's his name? I can't remember his name. But he's talking to your character, and he talks about how the cycles of history are always the same. The cycles of human history are always the same. We are essentially condemned to repeat the mistakes of our forefathers, just on grander scales and with grander technology, up until the point where we just annihilate ourselves ultimately. He says the only way to stop this is to break the wheel.
Right.
And he says the only way to do that is to stop being human. And that, but he also says that, like, this cannot be just for the wealthy. It cannot just be the few.
Yeah.
If we do this, it needs to be a human revolution.
Yeah.
That's where the title of the game comes from. It needs to be a renaissance. I want to transcend all of humanity.
Right. And that...
I want everyone to be more than human.
And that completely changes the equation of what he's saying, right? Because it's story
right.
is very different when it's a wealthy person pursuing gains for wealthy people, right?
Right.
But
when it's egalitarian in that way,
then
it's
far
like,
more interesting a question, isn't it?
It's like, in that world, it's like I can see his argument. I can really... I'm siding with, like, the wealthy industrialist here.
Well, it's
know?
always... I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I was thinking about that in terms of... There's a podcast I listened to called Behind the Bastards, which is really good. It's incredibly depressing, but it's also very funny. And they look at many of recent histories and the current day's kind of monsters. They did a really fascinating with Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation, and it was basically picking apart the edges of the legacy of that in terms of, like, yeah, they are trying to cure malaria, but, you know, some of the shit they've got up to in Africa is very dodgy, including this whole thing about, like, actively encouraging African men to have vasectomies by giving them the false impression that it somehow protected them from HIV, you know. Stuff like that. And it's like, you know, can you trace a direct line between Bill Gates and the charities that did that? Apart from funding, like, you can't say Gates personally went down there and said, I want you to do this or anything, but you know what I mean? Like, it's that thing of, like, you did fund that, mate. You did fund people that were doing that, and that does kind of stink. And I remember this headline, this is going back 10 or 15 years now, probably about I think it was about Warren Buffett saying, and the headline was, and it was, I want to say it was Time Magazine or Newsweek. It was one of those, you know, one of the big ones. And it said, you know, Warren Buffett, the billionaire who wants to save the world and is almost ready to do so. And it's like, yeah, but, you know, that was 15 years ago and the world is definitely not saved. Right. Like, they never get it across the line, these guys, right. You know.
It's funny, isn't it, for all the...
actually builds the fucking Iron Man suit in real life. Like, it doesn't happen.
No, and that's despite all of the resources, despite all of the influence and power.
Exactly. And it's, you know, I mean, Buffett's the guy with that great quote about, like, of course there's a class war. It's been going on for a century, and my class is winning, hands down. We're killing it, you know, and you guys are getting massacred.
It's hard to argue with.
Yeah, well, it's true, but it's a weird thing of, like, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, there is a kind of antagonism, isn't there?
It's the same thing with, you know, with Soros and that whole... I mean, I know he's kind of obviously become the target of these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and what have you, but he does... I mean, the kernel of truth inside the giant galaxy of bullshit that's been built around him is he does fund a lot of liberal causes, whatever that means. Yes, he does. Yes, he does, because he's a billionaire and he's got lots of money and, you know, charitable donations are tax write-offs, and he's a liberal. So that's what he does with his money. You know,
right.
Yeah, that happens. But, like, again, not actually saved the world appreciably. Not
really done a great deal, to be honest.
Really changed the direction of travel or even slowed the acceleration towards catastrophe. I mean, like, I'd settle for slowing shit down at this point. I really would. Like, taking the foot off the gas, maybe. Could we try that? I don't know.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it just doesn't happen, does it? There's either an incapacity to do it, or there's an unwillingness to do it. I don't know which, or whether it's a combination of the two.
I just can't tell. But I do. I mean, it's a fascinating question, actually. But I couldn't begin to formulate an answer. And you just all that you're left with is a kind of... I mean, all I'm left with certainly is that thing of, like, people are what they do. You know, they're not what they do or don't do. Yeah. And if you have that kind of power and you're not using it to make the world, you know, to try and affect massive change to make the world a better, safer, habitable place, then you're kind of on the wrong side of...
You're part of the problem. Yeah, I mean, it's what we were talking about when we did the Joker.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's exactly what we were talking about with the Joker, you know, how that punctures the myth of Thomas Wayne.
Absolutely.
It's exactly that. Thomas Wayne in that film certainly believes himself to be part of the solution. He believes that he's egalitarian and that he's the billionaire who's actually on the side of the poor, and doesn't realize that just by the fact of him being a billionaire, he's the problem.
Yeah, and the fact that he embraces those, those awful men who, yes, did not actually deserve to be shot in a subway, but were actually awful people. But the way he embraces them uncritically as family and as, it's like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly.
Whilst with the same breath condemning the poor of Gotham.
Absolutely, yeah. For it being for self-inflicted wounds, right? Effectively, like stop that. It's that Milo T-shirt. Stop being poor.
Yeah, right. Right, okay. No solution at all. Thank you for that.
The happy ending there is, of course, since Milo was deplatformed, he is in fact himself poor. So that kind of
yeah, and that is a happy ending.
It's like, why don't you try not being poor, Milo? See how that works out for you.
Yeah, right. Wow. It's what people like Milo in particular, because of course he is gay. It's like embracing the people who want to kill him.
Well, I mean, he claims he's been converted now, right? But I mean, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, but I mean, you're absolutely. I mean, the thing I've said this before as well, but that's my thing with characters like Milo is you really just want to shake and say like, we're going to be in the same fucking cattle cart. It's going to make no fucking difference.
Yeah, I had the same thing recently with Stephen Fry.
Yeah.
Stephen Fry has been like cozying up to Jordan Peterson recently, and what I'm seeing, because I actually did watch the interview between the two of them, the chat between the two of them, and you know what I noticed more than anything? Peterson saw him coming a mile away.
Yeah.
He saw him coming a mile away. You know the classic grifter thing of give me a smart mark anytime.
Yeah.
That's what you've got going on here, because Peterson brings up none of his more contentious talking points. He assiduously avoids them when he's talking to Stephen Fry, and B, he avoids all of those rote discussion points and phrases that he uses when he is in his own mind talking to the plebs.
Yep.
In a bizarre way, you can see the grift by its absence.
No, he code switches magnificent. So that's part of how he's been as successful as he has for as long as he has. And what's frustrating is that Stephen Fry does that classic thing of a person with a reasonably high IQ of going in there and thinking because he's got a reasonably high IQ, that's enough, and he doesn't have to do his homework before he talks to this guy, and he'll be able to take the measure of him by...
You know what the big thing is? He can't see the risk. And the reason he can't see the risk that these people pose is because he's insulated by his class.
Of course it is. Yeah, of course it is.
That's the truth of the matter. It sounds incredibly hyperbolic, but when the concentration camps open, he'll be one of the last on the train.
Yeah, but he's absolutely going to be riding...
He's absolutely going to be one of them.
He's going to end up... I mean, if he's really lucky, right, he'll get a ticket out and there'll be somewhere where he'll be safe. But if not, he'll be in the same cattle car as the rest of us.
That's what bothers me. It seems like it's the same with a lot of these sort of like older generation.
So, man, for me, it's a weird thing. You're supposed to get more liberal as you get older. I'm less tolerant of liberalism the older you get. The more I see it as a kind of as a bromide and non-answer to the reaction, right? And actually on a bad day, an enabling tool when they do shit like. Because that's actually what that does is that launders Peterson's reputation amongst a certain class of people.
So does.
That bad because you saw that Stephen Fry. Listen how.
Oh, look, Stephen Fry talks to him. He must be all right.
Those of us who vociferously criticise Peterson, we look like the loonies, right? Well, why are they so angry?
Exactly.
He's so reasonable, Russell Brand, God, he drives me fucking mental.
Russell Brand drives me up the wall because he is. It's the fact that people embrace him as an intellectual or as an academic, and he's not. He is the very personification of the notion of a popular intellectual, i.e. an oxymoron.
So the thing about Brand that kills me is he's so nearly bright, and he does. I will say this, he does occasionally back into insight, I would say, more than anything.
I think he does it accidentally.
That's what I mean. Yeah, he backs into it. It's not, but he does, and he can, and he does have these moments. And I do think he's bright, and I do think he's intellectually curious, actually, in his own way, weirdly. But he's just so fucking lazy. He's just so lazy, and it drives me.
You know what the problem with him is? He is more interested in appearing a particular way. There's a kind of narcissism involved with it. He's interested in appearing in a particular way. So he will use these elaborate terms of phrase and whatnot that sound, to people who are not that intellectually curious, quite frankly, sound impressive.
Yeah, and I think again, to be scrupulously fair, I think some of that does come from. I think some of that is coming from the way his brain works as well. I think he does have an unusual mind. I'm sure this. I mean, I don't believe in kind of diagnosing people at distance, but I'm sure. I mean, I know he's been through therapy, and I know he's still dealing with stuff like that. So there are things going on with him there, and I recognise that. I mean, there's certain patterns that you start to see after a while with someone, and as I say, I mean, the thing that drives me absolutely nuts is he is a bright guy. He actually is a bright guy. Like, he's not stupid. He's got above room temperature IQ, but it's just the way. I mean, for me with him as well, certainly in the last 10 years, he always wants to, he wants to bring things back to the unknowable and the ineffable as soon as he possibly can, because that is the safest ground on the world on which you can pontificate, because your foundations aren't made of anything. They're not.
That's right. There's a kind of flimflammery involved.
Yeah, but the other thing that always cracks me up about Brand is he does at least, and again, that's what's interesting about him to me, even though he annoys me, is he is aware of his narcissism, and he does talk about it, and he does to a degree. Weirdly, he owns it. But there's this weird thing where, like, I think he feels like because he's owned it out, that he therefore doesn't actually have to do anything about it, and we can forgive it, and we should still listen to him. And it's like, well, no, like.
That's it. And again,
you're not doing the work. You're not doing the work. You're just putting your hands up saying, yeah, but you have to respect honesty. Because I'm like, well, yeah, I do respect your honesty, mate, but I don't have to listen to you beyond that, though, because.
That's right. And again, the reason Peterson talks to Russell Brand is because he sees him coming a mile away, and he realizes that, frankly, Brand is just not clever enough to criticize Peterson.
I mean, to be fair, in Brand's case, he agrees with Peterson too much. They're so kind of invested in evidence of the unevidenceable, right? They're so invested in the notion of the mystic as the real thing in their own ways that I mean, Brand's got both hands tied behind his back before he even starts.
Yeah, sure. And Peterson, I mean, I'm sorry, Peterson's very particular kind of grifterism is that he sees that. He is so good at reading people.
He's brilliant at that. Yeah, he's really.
Because, he's a psychologist, isn't he? Of course he's good at reading that. He knows exactly what he's going to say and what level of argument or discussion he needs to enter into. That seems to be his particular brand of genius.
Yeah, and I think as well he knows when to deal with when to talk to the person he's talking to and when to talk to the gallery. That's the other thing.
Yeah. Because it changes. I mean, if you bother to look at the expanse of Peterson's work, like the rhetoric changes completely depending on who he's talking to.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and there is no consistency to him. And as you say, like, he knows what language to avoid when he's talking with Fry. He knows.
He so does. I tell you what, he never once says cultural Marxism. He never once says postmodernism. He avoids that language completely because he knows Fry is aware of that stuff.
And he knows what buttons to push. Someone like Brand on the spirituality side of things, right? On the ineffable. And if you get Brand off on that stuff, then you can. That's it. You can have as much fun as you want. You can go off and play because he's God.
That's it, but it's annoying me because I was hoping that Peterson would at least have the grace to bow out, after recent events.
Yeah, but like, I don't know. I mean, as my missus would say in another context, nothing going on but the rent. I mean, the grift is the grift. The money is there. It's that. One of the things that I've heard, and I'm sure it's true, you get to the point where you're making serious money like these guys are. When you get to 6 figures a year, that's very hard to give up. It's very hard.
You see it a lot in, like, funnily enough, in sort of from the same mire that the likes of Peterson arose from. So, like, that sort of internet quagmire of the mid-2000s, you know, where there were loads of pseudo-intellectuals, and you had loads of people in, like, the new atheist community and whatnot, who are now reliant upon the argument existing.
Yeah.
Even when all they're doing is A, repeating stuff that they've said or talked about a million times over for literally decades at this point, or B, there's just nothing else to talk about. There's nothing else to say.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I think the way that so many of those new atheists have seamlessly, you know, morphed into or merged with or become stepping stones to the reactionary right. It's just, again, I think if you want an illustration of why and how liberalism fails, you can have a more object lesson than the new atheism to far right pipeline, which is a absolutely real thing now. You know?
It is an absolute real thing. There is a trend. I mean, it's really, really frightening and problematic.
I really feel like, and I mean, I would say this because I'm on the other side of the argument, but I really do feel like so many of the people that have made that journey have abandoned and betrayed the intellectual roots of their atheism in the process. I find it really upsetting that they've created their own faith structure now. Actually, it's just as.
And you see it with the current crop of talking heads, because all you need to go into the comments section. And by the way, guys, for your own mental health, I would not advise doing this, but if you are curious enough and resilient enough, go into the comments section of any Jordan Peterson video, and the way his fans react to him is like he's a messiah.
Oh, it's terrifying.
They are incurious, they will not question, and they will not allow people to question him. That's the other thing.
The other thing that Peterson does, which has been a mainstay of, I mean, the other particular grifter group that I know very well for various very boring autobiographical reasons, is the Born Again movement, which I briefly fascinated with in the 90s. And I mean, God Bomb obviously is what ended up coming out of that in terms of creativity. But I spent a bit of time around that movement as it was trying to take root in the UK at the time. But obviously it was full of American material, because that's all they really had was the video, mega churches and pamphlets and magazines and so forth. But the thing that had in common with what we're seeing now is the way it just, as soon as you scratched the surface of what was in there, it was relentlessly right-wing. It was relentlessly materialistic, actually. And the one that stuck with me, I've never forgotten it, was an article explaining why it was really, really important that your pastor have a private jet. It was God's will, and you were kind of being an arsehole if you questioned. Because it was really important, because what could possibly, imagine the scene where your preacher has had to take the Greyhound bus for 14 hours, and as a result, when some sinner meets him and is desperate for his advice, he cannot find the words of solace he needs.
It's such a fucking grift. I mean, it's wow. The circumlocutions, the sinister, cynical hucksterism of that line of argument. But it's not a million miles away from what you've got being peddled now by the likes of Peterson and whatnot.
The grift is the grift. It doesn't really change. And
what I find with Peterson, what I always find is, if you don't allow for the base assumptions upon which his arguments or platforms operate, if you start questioning them from the off, then he never gets off the ground.
No, that's true. You really have to go at the foundations, because there's nothing there, and that's the thing.
There's nothing there. That's it. That's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all bollocks all the way down, from assumptions up, from assertions up, it is largely nonsense. And anyone who is not even that well-read, I mean, I don't consider myself that well-read in postmodernism. I just happened to study it in critical theory at university, and I went on to read a couple more postmodernist thinkers. But his conflation of things like Marxism and postmodernism, which is one of his foundational assertions in almost every lecture or seminar he ever does, is garbage.
Yeah, and I also don't understand. I mean, I say that I do understand. I'm just being polite. But fundamentally, actually, that is an anti-Semitic trope. Really, really is. The people who came up with the phrase cultural Marxism, fucking Nazis. The OG German Nazi Party came up with the term to find a way to conflate Marxism with Jewish people so that they could attack both groups together as part of their far-right project to take over Germany and do really horrible things.
But you know what your Jordan Peterson fans would say. They would come on and say, but that's not what he means, you see. And then you ask them, well, what does he mean? And they can't answer you.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't mean anything.
But the thing about the cult thing, and this is the other thing he's, I think, not in common with the born again preachers, is because I watched a few of their routines, to try and get my head around it. And what they do have in common with Peterson is the way that they mix in fairly banal self-help stuff.
Yeah.
None of it's earth-shattering. To be scrupulously fair, it's not bad either. Like, most of it's fairly humdrum advice stuff, but it's like, if you follow those steps, if you follow some of the steps don't involve sending all your money to the church, but some of the other, your life probably will improve if you're struggling with certain things. They're not terrible. And Peterson's got a similar thing. I mean, one of the 12 rules for life is always pet a cat. I can't argue with that.
Right. And that's it, isn't it?
Good life advice. It's not profound, right?
But it's not. It's no more than what you would find in any bargain basement self-help bit of dreck.
But if you've never heard that before, this is the first time you're hearing it, and for someone, it always is the first time. I think that's something we forget about, especially when we're those of us who are really engaged in this kind of argument and internet discourse in particular. It's very easy to get cynical and angry with people who don't understand what's going on. You've got to take that step back and say someone is always encountering these ideas for the first time. Someone is always encountering these terms for the first time. That's the nature of humanity. That's what's going on. And if this is your first encounter of that, given how he packages it, it's really easy to see how people get into it, I think.
Oh, I mean, don't get me wrong. He is incredible at what he does.
Yeah, he's skilled, absolutely.
He is probably, of all the sort of, talking heads, public intellectuals, quote unquote, he is one of the very best at what he does, because he is able, unlike, say, Ben Shapiro, who comes off as a shrieking, shrill imbecile most of the time, he is able to couch what he does in this veneer of intellectualism that sounds really impressive and even coherent, sometimes, until you start actually doing the wider reading and criticism.
Oh, and look, and as well as someone who's a fan of, and as someone who at times has themselves talked about and espoused upon the enormous power that narrative can have, right? Somebody believes in storytelling as a force for good in the world fundamentally, or something that storytelling is a powerful force that can be used for good in the world. Sorry, I should call it. I find some of, like, if I didn't know it was bullshit, I'd find it really interesting. Like, some of the way he talks about the way mythology ties in with behavior, ties in with psychology, ties in with evolution. If you didn't know it was more complicated, it does have a kind of, there's an instinctive kind of, you know what it is? It's truthiness. It's what's...
It's truthiness. Rather, that is exactly it. It is truthiness and not truth.
And it feels like it has a certain... Oh, yeah, man, what if it's all... Look, it's the same thing as when you got baked in high school and read, like, Chariot of the Gods. And we're like, wow!
Right. And don't get me wrong, there is a part of me that responds to that. I think there is a kind of truth to the universality of mythology and storytelling. There is something fundamentally human about it that arouses and moves and is part of our psychologies and our collective souls. He does sort of broach upon that, but then he markets it and utilizes that phenomena in such a simplistic and narrow and agenda-driven way.
Yeah, that's it. And it immediately... it becomes an engine for a reactionary movement.
For a reactionary movement, yes, when in fact it should be the exact opposite.
It should be liberatory. If you...
Of course.
Right.
And I think that's where he gets Fry, because I think Fry has that romance in his soul. I really do. And I think with Fry, a lot of it is it's this desire to be reaching across the table for a common humanity. But what Fry doesn't appreciate, because of his insulation as a result of his class, his background, and his money, his status, is that people like Peterson, when you reach across the aisle, they step back.
Yeah.
And they oblige you to walk forward again, and they keep going and going and going and going until you fall into the burning pit.
That's the entire right-wing intellectual project in a nutshell. That's exactly.
Yeah.
That's the process. That's Mitch McConnell's long game in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
You just keep taking the step back, and
by talking to him, you are legitimizing him.
Yeah, and it's completely understandable why it happens, and it's really, really fucking frustrating, and it shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And you just wish he'd do a bit more of his homework and a bit more of thinking and realise. Because the other thing is, like in the immediate term, the people who are going to suffer are going to be, people with Fry's sexual orientation that are working class and have no.
That's it.
Are victims of increasingly intolerant attitudes that are coming around in society because of people like Peterson.
That's exactly. I mean, you can actually use Fry as a case study for this. I mean, I've read like Moab Is My Wash Part and whatnot, Fry's background, so I know like what happened to him when he was young. So he was arrested for credit card fraud, because he stole a whole swathe of his parents' rich friends' credit cards and went on like a spending spree. So he was in jail for a brief period. Now, if someone of working class background had done the same thing, do you honestly think they would be where Fry is now?
But this is it, right? This is exactly it. Like, it doesn't make his experience less real. He had that experience happen, but you're absolutely right. The difference is because of his background, because of his class, and because of his because of his intellectual ability as shaped by the school system that he went through and all of that stuff. His natural talent twinned with a certain approach to education. He was able nonetheless to bounce back, to rise up, to have a career, to become incredibly successful. And
absolutely.
And it's not, and again, that's the interesting thing, is that one of the things that people get accused of a lot on the left is class envy. When you say something, oh well, you're just jealous because he had those opportunities. It's like, no, I'm not jealous. I want everybody to have that level of opportunity.
That's it. I want everyone to be able to be treated the same.
Grudge him what he had. What I'm saying is everyone should get that.
That's it. And also, I mean, I whenever I hear that is just bollocks. That is insincere bollocks. Whenever they say that, that's just a way of shutting down the conversation. It's not sincere. They don't even believe that. Oh, it's the politics of envy. Fuck off. No, it isn't.
It's funny because talking about the weaknesses of liberalism, there was I watched ContraPoint's latest, and
yes, cold Contra.
Oh, bless her. But the thing that really hit me on that,
I wish she were better.
I do wish she were better.
I really wish Natalie were better.
I do too. But we're talking about the inherent weaknesses and failures of liberalism, so sooner or later you're going to love talking about Natalie, because there she is. I mean, there she is. Well,
there's so much good that could be done.
There are moments. I mean, one of the things that I've said this before privately, I don't think I've said it publicly, but I think one of the things that cracks me up the most about her when you go back and watch some of her earlier videos is she doesn't realise that her caricature communist cat lady actually wins every fucking argument she has. It's so great. Like, she genuinely doesn't realise that she loses to the communist cat girl every time. It's honestly, go back and watch it. It's incredible. It really is. That I find uplifting, honestly. The art being wiser than the woman. I think I quite like that.
That is rather interesting.
But the most recent one, there was a moment where she talked about envy, and she talked about the way envy feels and she said, I think this is she described it, and then she said, I think this is a universal emotion. I think everybody feels it, and it's an irreducible part of the human creature of human behavior. And I thought, I do not recognize what you just described. I do not. Right. I genuinely, and I wasn't like, it sounds like virtue signaling, where I swear it's not. I have fucking flaws, trust me. I just don't feel the way she described about people when I see them successful.
Well, no, I mean, like, I find that bizarre as well. Like, part of my problem that I've had my entire life is I'm not motivated by what society wants me to be motivated by. So when, like, during the pandemic, when people I know who are sort of like, they're kind of bourgeois, they're on like a sort of upper middle
Yeah.
bracket, were discussing their kitchens, the new kitchens that they were going to have.
Yeah.
It's like, I, even at the best of times, I could not be less interested.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not moved by it. I don't care about things like people's bank balances. I don't care about their houses. I don't care about their cars. I couldn't give a shit. I really couldn't. I find it so profoundly unmotivating and unattractive and unappealing. And that seems to be where the narrative of envy comes from, because the people who are utilizing the argument, oh, it's the politics of envy, are so materialistic, and because they define exclusively by status, the only way they can define the dynamic is though, oh, well, they must be envious of what I have or what this person has. It's not that. It's more complex than that. I don't care. And I know that there are people out there who are like, oh, well, if you're offered a bigger house, would you take it? I don't know. Probably not. I'm okay.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't care. I honestly, I can't be motivated by that.
Yeah, but the other thing about that is, like, if someone were to offer me a bigger house, would I take it? Yeah, I probably would. But I'm not sitting here thinking, fuck, I haven't got a bigger house, and that means my life's shit. Like, that's...
Oh, that means I'm going to sit here and just hate on people.
That's the difference, right? It's like, yeah, I can. It's not like I can't appreciate whatever. I could, when I see some of the uses people put money to that have more money than me, and I can look at it and think, that'd be fun, right? I could see individual things I could look at and go, yeah, I imagine that's quite fun. That looks like fun. I could do that. That would be all right. But I'm not like, I don't need it. I don't feel angry with them for having it. I don't resent them for doing it. You know what I mean?
All.
It's like...
I mean, sometimes I feel frustrated with them when they want me to be enthusiastic about it. Like, when people will show me their new... Like, it happens all the time. People will show me pictures of their new kitchens on their phones, and I'm like, it's a kitchen.
Yeah.
I honestly, I can't, like... I lack something fundamental there.
Sometimes I think people will talk about it in professional terms as well. And I'm thinking now about when I was lucky enough to interview Paul Tremblay as a guest of honor at FCon a couple of years ago, and he talked about how, I think he was talking about a difference between envy and jealousy. Maybe he was saying like he thought it was probably, I can't remember which way around he put the words, because it's typical for a writer, right? I can't remember. But he was like, basically one of them's okay and one of them isn't. And I think it was like envy is okay, jealousy isn't, because one of them's more negative. It's like it's okay to his thing was like, it's okay to be spurred on by other people's success. If you see someone succeeding, it's okay to look at that and think, man, I want that, and to try and push to get something like that, as long as it doesn't make you angry towards that person, as long as it doesn't make you bitter, as long as it doesn't make you either have self-loathing or loathing for others. As a spur, it's okay. As a kind of as an aspirational thing, it's okay. And I thought it was interesting, because I remember thinking, man, I don't even really have that. Maybe I'm never going to cut it, because I don't even really have that. I don't.
That's it. I mean, that is it's a fundamental. It is kind of a problem in the systems that have been set up, isn't it?
What's useful about it, I think, is when I remember, and I do occasionally have to have conversations like this to remind myself, it's like, what I'm excited by is just doing the cool thing for the sake of doing the cool thing, especially when it comes to writing. It's just like, it is the act of creation. And it, I'd love for as many people to read it as want to read it. And if they get stuff out of it, that's like, I'm not over here in sackcloth and ashes, and if Doubleday knock on the door tomorrow, I will absolutely take the deal, because I want, I want to be published, and I'd like to do it instead of what I do for a day job. So, of course.
Right.
But it's still, the primary motivation is the love of doing the thing.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, it's wanting to change the world. That's why I do it. It's wanting to change people's minds. It's wanting to have territory in people's heads. It's like, it's kind of that.
Sure.
That's more important to me.
I think having that interaction. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day. I mean, King's always my touchstone for this, because King's always said, don't tell him, but I'd do it for free if I had to. And I believe it, because he's putting out 3 books a year, and he doesn't fucking need to, for Christ's sakes. I think that's probably true. I think it is a compulsion with him, and maybe with a lot of the greats, it is a compulsion as well. And that's.
I think so.
But yeah, I just think about like, I just think about that. I think about him saying that, and I think like, yeah, pretty much. I think that's I'm doing it because I like doing it, and it's not that and it's not that I won't try and be successful at it. I will absolutely try and be successful at it because I want. I want more people to read it. I'd like to do it for a living. All those things matter, but I don't. Fundamentally, it's. I mean, the other thing that he says, like, I'd like to make you think, but I have to make you feel.
That's absolutely it. There has to be like a visceral connection.
That's my job.
Yeah. I was thinking about it recently. I think I did a Strange Playgrounds about it at one point, but it's that notion of sincerity.
Oh, yeah.
I've got such a nose for sincerity in prose, it's unbelievable. I can so tell when someone has written a story just because they want it, because, I don't know, there was a deadline coming up and it's like, oh, I've got to get this story out.
You know what? I'm so glad you said that, because after a mere 2.5 hours, you've found the segue, George.